Chapter 21. Kill Crack. The sickening snap of bone echoed in the stillness. Nathan withdrew his hand from the fallen bandit's skull and let his body relax to the ground. He exhaled slowly, every muscle uncoiling. Turning, he addressed Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko. All the sentries are down. Next step, Shizuko. Shizuko stood, a flush of nerves still on her pale cheeks. Hold this position on the path below, Nathan ordered. Guard our exit and deal with any stragglers who try to slip past. She drew in a shaky breath, then nodded decisively. Understood. Nathan shifted his gaze to Ryosuke. You and I will move up the mountain and finish off the main bandit camp. No problem, Ryosuke replied with steady confidence. Having grown up in the ninja world, he bore no hint of fear, even now, when danger loomed close. They shared a brief look, then Nathan gave the signal. Let's go. Yes. In unison, they sprinted up the steep trail, leaving Shizuko to watch their rear and secure their escape route as the first rays of dawn pierced the forest canopy. Nathan moved forward with Ryosuke close on his heels. Mizutani Shizuko paused at the tree line, then slipped silently into the dense forest to scout ahead. It had been 3 hours since they'd reached the edge of Xiaohei Mountain. The first 2 hours were spent resting. The last was spent quietly neutralizing the sentry posts. With those obstacles removed, it was time to strike. Strike felt a bit grandiose. Intelligence from the watch posts had told Nathan there were only about 50 men in the bandit camp to begin with, and perhaps fewer than 40 still alive. As long as none of them were unusually tough opponents, Nathan and Ryosuke felt no real threat. The only challenge was steadying their nerves, and both had proven more than equal to the task. By moonlight, Nathan and Ryosuke crept over loose stones and snapped branches, closing in on the bandits' hideout. The word camp was generous. It consisted of a cluster of just over 20 crude wooden huts, lacking even a simple stockade. Seeing its flimsy defenses, Nathan finally understood why the bandits had posted so many sentries, and why eliminating them had been so crucial. Now, with the camp's guard down, the time for a swift, decisive strike had come. Nathan could feel the chill of mortality brush past him, but he banished the thought with a sharp shake of his head. He caught Liangji's eye and gave a subtle hand signal. Without a word, they melted into the shadows on either side of the bandit camp. At its heart stood the mountain leader's wooden lodge. Rather than storm the main gate and risk encirclement, they would strike from the flanks, swiftly, silently, before any alarm could be raised. Under cover of night, Nathan crept toward the perimeter, every breath measured, every muscle coiled for action. A lone guard patrolling the outer wall gave Nathan his chance. In one fluid motion, he clamped a hand over the man's mouth, pressed him against the rough timber, and drove a kunai clean through the chest. The sickening thud of steel meeting flesh echoed in the stillness. The bandit's eyes flew open, first with confusion, then pain, then raw terror, before his body crumbled into a swirl of ash. Nathan held the guard's gaze until the final particles drifted away. He did not flinch. He did not look away. In this world of shadows and steel, hesitation was death. As long as he lacked the power to reshape fate, he would master its rules and survive. Nathan exhaled softly as he stepped out of the rickety wooden hut, the faint echo of his blade's swift work still lingering in the cool night air. This hut stood on the very edge of the encampment. Both its location and its shabby condition made it the perfect hideaway for a lone occupant. With no chance of alarming neighbors, Nathan felt free to proceed. He paused to let his eyes adjust, then scanned the surrounding huts until he settled on the next target, another forlorn shack, barely held together by rotting planks. Creeping closer, he pressed his eye to the narrow crack beside the door and watched for movement. There was only one sleeping figure inside. Satisfied, Nathan slipped a kunai between the boards, forced the door open just enough to slip through, and disappeared into the darkness. Moments later, he emerged without so much as a sound. The man inside never stirred. Nathan's knife had found its mark at the throat and finished the job. He moved on, repeating the same procedure from hut to hut. Scope, slip in, finish the target, slip out. Each life he took was a hushed note in an otherwise silent symphony. The night air remained still around him, and he nearly believed this grim harvest would go uninterrupted. But fate had other plans. As he dispatched his 10th victim, A sudden, blood-curdling scream shattered the stillness of the camp. It rang out through the darkness, raw, desperate, and Nathan froze in place, heart pounding. The hunt had gone too far. Someone had awakened. Nathan hesitated for only a heartbeat, then moved faster, his blade flashing as he cut down 2 more men in rapid succession. Bursting from the battered house, he scanned the courtyard. A single bandit stumbled clear of the door, clutching his throat as he ran, shrieking, "We're under attack!" Before the yell could finish, another figure burst from the same doorway. It was Ryosuke, in full chase. With a swift lunge, he drove a kunai into the back of the fleeing bandit, silencing him instantly. Yet the camp was far from subdued. From within the cluster of wooden shacks came urgent rustlings, hurried footsteps, the clack of swords being drawn, muffled shouts. Nathan sprinted toward the nearest hut, kicked its door wide open in one powerful swing, and swept inside. 2 more bandits barely had time to draw breath before he cut them down. Almost without pause, he vaulted back into the yard and raced to the next cabin, repeating the deadly efficiency. Ryosuke, now abandoning stealth, tore through the camp alongside him, slaying any foe who dared stand in his path. When the dust settled and the last echoes of struggle faded, only 12 bandits remained alive in the camp. The bandit chief glared at his 11 remaining men, his face twisted with anger. A soft tap-tap echoed as Nathan and Liang Jie stepped out of the battered shack, the metal plates on their forehead protectors catching the fading light. One of the bandits froze, terror in his eyes. "Ninjas!" he blurted. "We're finished!" Since the outbreak of the Ninja World War, every whisper of shinobi skill had become legend and nightmare to common outlaws. These men had never faced real ninjas before, but they had certainly heard the stories. The chief cracked his knuckles and slapped the panicked bandit across the face. "Nonsense!" he barked. He spat on the ground, then turned to Nathan and Liang Jie with a cruel grin. "They're just 2 kids," he shouted. "We'll overwhelm them together. I don't believe any 2 ninjas can survive my men." With that, he hefted his sword and charged forward. But Nathan only shifted his grip, and with a soft click, 6 razor-edged shurikens suddenly appeared between his fingers, gleaming in the dusk. In that instant, silence fell over the clearing, and every man realized that this fight was far from the easy victory they'd imagined. The next moment, my shuriken whistled through the air. The bandit boss staggered, desperately twisting to dodge, but ninja tool throwing, even at just level 2, was no joke. As a fellow shinobi, I could finesse my throw to target vitals or deflect his blade if I'd been on the receiving end, but he was nothing more than a common bandit leader. Of course, he couldn't match me. Half a step later, he crumpled to the ground. "Ah, he's dead! Everyone, run!" No one knew who shouted first, but the 11 bandits immediately scattered in all directions. Liangsuke and I exchanged a quick glance, then split up to pursue different fleeing rogues. Before long, only the handful who'd bolted down the mountain remained within sight. Chapter 22 Return. On the far side of the mountain road, Shizuko Mizutani stood tense and alert. Her thoughts raced with worries for Nathan and Ryosuke's safety, and with plans for what to do if the enemy appeared. Time dragged as she waited, eyes scanning every shadow and curve of the path. After what felt like an eternity, hurried footsteps echoed from below. Shizuko stiffened, every nerve on edge. "Who's coming?" She paused to listen. Not Nathan. His steps were lighter, more controlled. Not Ryosuke. Their strides were too small. No, these were the heavy, confident footsteps of an adult. It had to be the enemy. Shizuko's mind cleared. There was no time to hesitate. Silent as a cat, she slipped closer to the road's edge, peering through the trees. 2 bandits pounded up the trail, glancing over their shoulders in fear. Their ragged breaths and panicked expressions told Shizuko all she needed to know. They were running from something, or someone, powerful. Suddenly, a whoosh of air sliced through the tension. In a blur, a kunai whistled past, embedding itself deep in the calf of the leading bandit. He cried out, staggered, and the second man skidded to a halt, eyes wide. Shizuko held her breath, heart pounding. Whoever had thrown that kunai wasn't the pair she'd been waiting for, but this ambush was just the beginning. With every sense alert, she prepared to move. Nathan and Ryosuke were still out there, and now, more than ever, they needed her. A scream ripped from his lips as he stumbled backward, crashed into a root, and rolled across the forest floor. The kunai he'd been clutching clattered against a tree trunk and fell from his grasp. His fellow bandits skidded to a halt, eyes fixed on the direction the weapon had come from, and on the small figure emerging from the tree line. Barely half a man's height, the boy stepped into the clearing with calm, measured steps. What struck the bandits first was the strange, crescent-shaped crest stamped on his forehead, the very same mark they'd seen on the demon warriors who'd butchered dozens of their comrades only days before. A chill of dread ran through them. Yet when the boy's dark eyes met theirs, the man closest to the edge of the clearing felt panic give way to pleading hope. He dropped to his knees and pitched forward into a desperate kowtow. "Mercy," he cried, voice trembling. "I never wanted to join those monsters. I did it to feed my family. I've never harmed an innocent soul. I have 2 little children at home, just about your age. If you kill me, they starve. Please, spare me. I swear on their lives, I will never do wrong again." He pressed his forehead so hard against the damp earth that when he finally raised his head, blood trickled down in a thin, dark line. Shitsuko Mizutani studied the trembling bandit before her. His ragged clothes and haunted eyes looked almost pitiful. Could everything he claimed be true? She wondered. If so, she tightened her grip on her blade. He and his comrades would pay in full. Her hesitation was short-lived. From the shadows, a kunai sang through the air and buried itself in the first bandit's throat. The man choked, slumped forward, and crumpled. In a flash, Nathan appeared at his side, yanking the blade free and stepping over the corpse as blood spattered on stone. Without a word, he turned to the second bandit, who stood frozen in terror. Smoothly, Nathan thrust a second kunai through the man's chest. The bandit's legs gave out, and he dropped to his knees before falling face first into the dirt. "Don't overthink things in the middle of an operation," Shizuko scolded as she sheathed her own weapon. Nathan held up a hand, stopping her before she could continue. His voice was calm, almost detached. "Our mission is clear. Remember the objective." He turned away, descending the rocky path with measured steps, disappearing into the gloom below. Shizuko stood motionless, watching his figure vanish against the inky forest. After a long, heavy silence, she murmured to herself, "We leave no one alive. It was their order, Aris from the start. Eliminate every bandit hiding on Xiaohei Mountain. Let even one slip through, and the mission would be a failure. No excuses, no second chances." Nathan wasn't being stubborn for stubbornness' sake. He wasn't trying to imitate Kakashi. He simply wanted Shizuko Mizutani to understand one unbreakable rule. A mission is a mission. Overthinking in the field invites disaster. For now, their Class 17 would operate as a single unit, tackling assignments together for the foreseeable future. Nathan knew he couldn't afford to be weighed down by careless teammates, so when the situation demanded it, he had to be merciless. Still, he reminded himself this was only a temporary stance. He refused to become a disposable tool of the village, like one of the root shinobi. Once his skills grew, he'd forge his own path. Until then, it was better to be useful. By the time they'd finished their descent, the 3 of them rejoined. Furukawa, who'd vanished for hours, finally reappeared, his sharp gaze sweeping each of them up and down. He offered a curt nod. "Not bad," he said, then gestured them toward the village. The mountainside was too dangerous to risk an overnight camp, so he intended to escort them home. Nathan had no objections. Nathan would have been perfectly happy staying in the village indefinitely. Unfortunately, that wasn't an option. From now on, he'd have to head out on missions from time to time, and he could only hope that Instructor Furukawa wouldn't overload his team with too many C-rank jobs. Time flew, and by early the next morning, Nathan and his teammates arrived back in Konoha. The trip had been unexpectedly smooth, almost surreal. Nathan couldn't help but think, this really isn't my story. Nothing here revolves around me. He grinned at the thought, imagining Naruto someday climbing to S-rank on every mission. Good thing I don't have a protagonist's destiny, or I'd be jinxed, Nathan muttered under his breath, secretly relieved. "All right," he said to his friends, stretching his arms. "Let's go rest up." As they passed through the gates, Furukawa called out, "No missions for the next 3 days. Take the time to relax and train." "Thank you, Sensei," the 3 of them chorused, voices tired but relieved. "See you later," Nathan added, waving. Furukawa smiled and waved them off. Once he was out of earshot, Nathan exchanged farewells with his two companions and slipped away toward the Uchiha compound, eager to catch up on some reading, and, if he was lucky, steal a few minutes of peace. Nathan finally staggered through the door and sank into a wooden chair, his armor clattering to the floor. The mission had lasted only a single day, but it felt like an eternity. A few hours ago, he'd been an ordinary cultivator, someone who'd never even killed a chicken. Now he was an executioner who had personally taken more than 20 lives. He told himself the bandits had earned their fate, and he'd even found the presence of mind to watch over his teammates' spirits during the operation. But back in the quiet of home, the faces of the dying kept flashing before him. His limbs felt leaden, and he couldn't summon the energy to practice. Still, a cultivator cannot afford sloth. Nathan shook his head to clear the images and forced his spine straight. He rose and gathered his focus, beginning the art of reflecting the heart with the care of a novice. His mind churned through the basic steps, centering his awareness on his heartbeat, withdrawing inward until the world fell away. Because the battle had demanded little chakra, his reserves were full. Wasting such a gift was out of the question. He would turn every drop of energy into progress. Minute by minute, Nathan's breathing slowed, and his spirit, once rattled by blood and death, gradually balanced itself. Under his deliberate, steady guidance, the flow of chakra found its pathways, weaving through meridians he'd barely explored before. By the time he opened his eyes again, the turmoil in his chest had settled. Though the memory of the lives he'd taken would not vanish overnight, Nathan felt a measure of control return. Tomorrow he would press on, honing body and mind until neither battlefield nor past could break his resolve. Nathan watched the progress bar climb steadily, and with each notch, his racing thoughts began to quiet. Inevitably, his chakra reserves ran dry, so he paused to restore his energy. Once his core felt replenished, he returned to practicing the art of heart reflection. By the time he had completed 2 full cycles, the sun stood high in the sky. His limbs heavy with fatigue, Nathan washed quickly, then collapsed onto his bed. In the stillness of his bedroom, he slipped into a restless sleep, his brow tightening and relaxing as he turned over vague, unreachable visions in his mind. Chapter 23, Ordinary. 3 days later, Nathan and the others stood amid the dense forest northwest of Konoha. The tall pines and maples filtered the morning light into mottled patterns on the forest floor. "Is this the place?" Ryosuke asked, peering through the undergrowth. Furukawa gave a curt nod. "This is it. Now, follow the mission briefing, gather the specified medicinal herbs, and don't mix them up with any lookalikes." Nathan inhaled the crisp woodland air. Today's mission was a simple D-rank herb gathering assignment, exactly what he'd predicted. Instead of scrambling for C-rank jobs like before, Furukawa had secured this low-risk task. It was clearly issued by the Nara clan, who held exclusive rights to this territory. The forest didn't just yield rare herbs that couldn't be farmed, its deer herds produced antlers coveted for powerful medicines. With resources like these, not even fellow Konoha shinobi could enter without permission. That explained why they'd accepted the job. Without formal sanction, they'd have been turned away at the forest's edge. As the 3 shinobi fanned out among the trees, Nathan's senses sharpened. Each leaf and root held value, and each mistake could cost them the mission's reward. Carefully, he knelt by a patch of ferns, scanning for the bright green shoots he needed. In this quiet wood, even the softest footstep felt thunderous. But for now, the task was clear. Gather the right herbs, avoid the wrong ones, and get out before anyone realized they were here. After Furukawa finished giving his orders, Ryosuke waved his hands impatiently. "Seriously, this is a job anyone could handle. Why do we have to?" "Ryosuke, enough." Mizutani Shizuko gently placed a hand on his arm and offered a reassuring smile before speaking more sternly. "This forest may seem safe, but wild beasts wander in here from time to time. If untrained civilians ran into one, it could end in disaster. That's why the village sent genin like us on this patrol." Ryosuke huffed, but he fell silent. Fine, Shizuko. I get it." Nathan watched them both, secretly relieved. 3 days away had clearly done the others good. Enough time to steady their nerves after that last mission's shock. They still carried some of the same banter and swagger, but the childish spark in their eyes had dimmed ever since they'd seen real blood. That change in them, Nathan realized, was exactly what Furukawa and perhaps the village elders had hoped for. He shook his head, pushing the thought aside, and readied himself for whatever came next. Nathan centered himself, gathering chakra beneath his feet, and followed his two companions deeper into the forest. Over the past 3 and nearly 4 days of focused practice, his chakra control had advanced from level 2, 350-500, to level 3, 1000. His finesse with chakra had improved so much that he now expended 15 less chakra when casting the same ninjutsu, all without sacrificing power. That improvement marked the upper limit an average shinobi could reach through training alone. Although Nathan still benefited from the proficiency panel bonus that steadily boosts his progress, new breakthroughs would be hard to come by in the near future. As soon as he hit level 3, each day's training yielded diminishing returns. What used to earn him 40 to 50 proficiency points now yielded no more than 5. Still, the time and chakra investment for these drills were minimal. If they had been significantly taxing, Nathan would have long since given them up. With his control solidified at this new level, he pressed on, ready for whatever awaited them in the heart of the forest. Nathan had decided that, until he discovered a more efficient way to train, he wouldn't waste time or energy on endless drills. From now on, he'd confine his exercises to spare moments, like right now, foraging for herbs on a routine mission. "Nathan, hurry up!" Liangsuke's voice rang out from ahead. Startled, Nathan shook himself free of his thoughts. "On my way," he called, pushing through the low brew. Shesh. By the time he caught up, Liangsuke and their third teammate were already halfway up the ridge. The 3 of them had spent the last week dealing exclusively with D-rank assignments. Nothing challenging for fresh academy grads, but in the ninja world, even the simplest tasks demanded vigilance. That evening, back in his quarters, Nathan woke just before midnight. He exhaled slowly, letting the extra chakra from his reflecting heart technique dissipate in his skull. Satisfied that his mind had settled, he reached out with a thought and summoned the familiar system panel before him. Name, Uchiha Nathan, age 10 constitution, 6 spirit, chakra, 14, 1546-2011. Bloodline, Sharingan, unawakened, 81-100. Skills and levels, chakra refinement technique, Vu, 240-500, 306-500. Clone technique, Luv, 2, 140-500-270-500. Transformation technique, level 2, 130-500, 206-500. Substitution technique, Lev 2, 110-500, 250-500. Fire release, fireball technique, Lev 1, 16-200 and 30-200. Heart reflecting art, Lev 2, 110-500. Basic physical skills, Volhan 2, 150-500, 280-500. Ninja tool throwing, Lev 2, 260-500, 380-500. Chakra control, 3, 25-1000. Nathan stared intently at his status panel, zeroing in on the Sharingan's awakening gauge. Sure enough, it remained stubbornly locked at 81 out of 100. No change, he murmured. By his calculations, advancing the heart-reflecting art to level 2, 110-500, should have nudged his Sharingan to 82-100, but the bar refused to budge. Puzzled, Nathan replayed the rules in his mind, trying to pinpoint why the expected increase hadn't materialized. Just as he expected, his fears came true. Nathan had known from the start that awakening the Sharingan wouldn't be easy, and he'd also realized that his heart-reflecting technique, powerful as it was, would inevitably lose effectiveness the closer he got to full awakening. Sure enough, when his Sharingan progress hit 81 out of 100, even 10 points of proficiency in the heart-reflecting technique couldn't nudge the gauge forward by a single mark. Any other Uchiha would have ground to a halt at this point. Their only options would be to wait for the Sharingan to flare to life on its own, an unpredictable event in the clan's history, or to throw themselves into mastering the heart-reflecting technique in the hopes that a higher proficiency score might force a breakthrough. But the former risked diluting the technique's power, and the latter offered no real promise. If 10 points couldn't move the needle, who was to say that 20 or 30 ever would? It was a road that led nowhere. Of course, Nathan was different. Nathan studied the proficiency panel with growing satisfaction. Thanks to it, he had effortlessly accelerated his mastery of the reflection heart technique and could now glimpse its ultimate form. Still, he resisted the urge to spend another hour practicing and turned his attention to the rest of the screen. Aside from reflection heart, the three taijutsu skills, basic physical techniques, chakra reinforcement, and ninja tool throwing, were all advancing at the same steady rate. Over the past 10 days, each had gained more than 100 proficiency points. But when he checked his chakra ceiling, he noticed a subtle shortfall. According to theory, raising his chakra refinement technique by 120 points should have increased his chakra limit by 4 times that amount, 480 points, taking him from 546 to 2026. Instead, his panel read 2011, 15 points below the expected total. The explanation was simple. His internal chakra container was nearly full. The chakra refinement technique had indeed unlocked potential faster, but it couldn't expand his innate ceiling on its own. Right now, the deficit was only in the teens, but as he pushed further, it could easily grow to dozens of points. Nathan leaned back and considered his next step. The reflection heart technique was within reach. Yet true progress would require more than just tapping latent potential. It would demand a breakthrough in his chakra capacity itself. Nathan understood that once he'd fully unlocked his potential, the chakra refining technique would do little more than restore his chakra. To make a real leap in ability, he had to awaken the Sharingan, and fast. With a quiet resolve, Nathan closed the training interface and dove into a fresh round of exercises. Chapter 24. Encounter. Nathan, over here. On one of Konoha's quieter side streets, Ryusuke waved impatiently, his companion Mizutani Shizuko standing just behind him. Nathan strolled toward them at a leisurely pace. As soon as he was within earshot, Ryusuke frowned and jabbed a finger in Nathan's direction. "You're too slow, man. We agreed we'd shop together, no getting here late." Nathan merely smiled. He knew Ryusuke's grumbling was more habit than genuine annoyance, so he held back any excuse and asked instead, "Okay, where to first?" Normally, Nathan would have balked at the idea of wasting time on sightseeing. Konoha didn't exactly overflow with attractions. But the past weeks had been relentlessly busy. It had been half a month since the effects of the Yingshin technique began to wane, and in that time their team leader, Furukawa, had sent them straight on another C-rank mission. This one wasn't about hunting bandits, but providing an escort for a merchant caravan. Although they'd run into a few setbacks, roadblocks, tricky local terrain, they hadn't faced any real danger. Now Nathan was more than ready for a day off. "Let's start at the market stalls by the east gate," Mizutani suggested, her dark eyes brightening. "They've just received fresh supplies from the capital." "Sounds good," Nathan agreed, falling in beside Ryosuke. As they set off down the winding street, the afternoon sun filtered through the wooden slats overhead, promising at last a little rest, and maybe a few surprises on this unexpected shopping trip. Nathan sighed inwardly. He'd give anything to drop the constant spotlight that came with being the protagonist. Just then, his friend Liang Suki waved him over and pointed down the street. "Check it out," Liang said. "A new meatball shop just opened. Word is it's amazing." Nathan followed the gesture. A brightly lit storefront at the corner had drawn a long, eager line of customers spilling onto the sidewalk. If that many people were queuing, the food had to be good. He was about to suggest they join the line when familiar voices carried across the street. "Kakashi, hurry up. We still have to make up for missing Rin's birthday," urged a boyish voice. "I really don't want to, Obito," came a reluctant reply. "Come on, this is important. Besides, that meatball place just opened down there. I'll treat you. No cutting me off, Kakashi." The names, Obito, Kakashi, Rin, struck a chord in Nathan's memory. Curious, he turned and peered across the road. 3 small figures were walking together, one in front, 2 trailing close behind. The leader's back was to him, but the unmistakable Uchiha clan crest on his jacket left no doubt. It was Uchiha Obito. The speaker in front of them was chattering away, completely oblivious to the curious glances cast his way. Behind him stood 2 figures, a man and a woman, both facing toward Nathan and Mizutani Shizuko. Nathan caught sight of their faces in the briefest of glances. Well, at least one of them. The other remained partly hidden. The visible figure was a boy of about 11 or 12, his silver hair falling over a mask that concealed all but his single, unreadable eye. A short sword was slung across his back, and his posture was rigid with discipline. Nathan's pulse quickened when he recognized him, Hatake Kakashi, still living in the long shadow of his father's death. Nathan couldn't tear his gaze away. Then, as if sensing the scrutiny, Kakashi paused mid-conversation and turned. His eye locked onto Nathan's with a sudden intensity that sent a chill racing down Nathan's spine, like the glare of a predator sizing up its prey. Heart hammering, Nathan forced himself to look away. "Nathan, are you okay?" Shizuko asked, stepping closer, concern evident in her voice as she studied his pale face. Nathan exhaled slowly and forced a calm tone. "It's nothing," he said. He resumed walking, but he couldn't help glancing back at Kakashi. This time, though, a strange confidence steadied him. Moments ago, when their eyes had met, he'd felt raw fear. He wasn't a straw njere to killing, bandits and petty thieves who couldn't even put up a fight. But Kakashi was on another level entirely, a veteran forged in battlefields strewn with corpses and rivers of blood. Of course he'd felt fear. The real test was whether he could move past it. Uchiha Obito noticed Kakashi's shifting gaze. "What's he doing?" he asked, tilting his head. Kakashi spared a quick glance over his shoulder. Obito followed his line of sight and froze. There, strapped to the newcomer's back, was that unmistakable paddle-shaped scroll, the clan's symbol. Nathan wasn't just any academy graduate. He was a Uchiha descendant. Obito blinked, then turned back to Kakashi in a low voice. "Who is he?" From Nathan's freshly pressed uniform and the way he carried himself, Obito guessed he'd only just earned his graduation papers. A rookie, yes, but one who bore a name heavy with history. Obito Uchiha frowned as he walked alongside Kakashi and Lin through the marketplace. He couldn't understand why Kakashi was so intent on watching Nathan, the quiet newcomer with him, rather than focusing on the usual crowd. When Obito finally asked for an explanation, Kakashi simply shook his head and said nothing more. They came to a small stall where plumes of steam curled over bamboo baskets of meatballs. Kakashi, Obito, and Lin stood up front to place their order, while Nathan fell back with his two companions, Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko. Obito and Ryosuke chatted eagerly about their training. Lin and Shizuko offered the occasional laugh. But neither Kakashi nor Nathan joined in. They both seemed lost in thought. A few minutes later, the three returned with steaming bowls of meatballs wrapped in tender dough and coated in tangy sauce. Kakashi nodded to the others, and they set off down the street, leaving Nathan on the fringes of the group. He watched them go, the red-capped village gate looming behind them, and murmured to himself, "They've come back for the Chunin exams." It wasn't hard to figure out. Konoha held its Chunin exams twice a year, once in early January and once in early July. Now that it was late November, the next exam would begin in just over a month. Given their ages and ranks, Nathan realized exactly why Kakashi and the others had returned. In peacetime, 30 days might feel endless or fly by in an instant, but with the Chunin exams approaching, every single day counted. Nathan knew that under ordinary circumstances, a month would be more than enough time to make it back to the village, but wartime changed everything. Most Genin were little more than cannon fodder on the front lines, yet those handpicked by the senior Jonin for the Chunin exam were in a different category. They carried out vital missions, and you couldn't simply call them in with the same rote orders you used for regular troops. Their current duties had to be reassigned, and for their personal safety, they needed dedicated escorts. After all, these promising young shinobi represented the future of the village. If something happened to them on the road, the entire community could suffer irreversible loss. That's why their returns were staggered. You never saw them all coming home at once. In fact, it wasn't unusual to spot the first arrivals a full month before the main contingent. Nathan's gut told him the other three he'd been tracking would make up that initial group, with more following in weeks to come. The only way to prove his theory would be to count the number of fresh-faced Genin roaming the streets over the next month, and see if it matched his expectations. Chapter title: Chunin Exam. Nathan strode along the sunlit path outside the academy, an uneasy knot tightening in his stomach. He'd learned that once the Chunin exams wrapped up, rookies like them would almost certainly be fast-tracked to the front lines. In other words, there wouldn't be much time left for leisurely drills or casual sparring. His fingers twitched, eager to race home and launch right into rigorous training. But as he approached the row of food stalls lining the courtyard, he spotted Ted Liangji and their other teammate, already settled on a low wooden bench, menus in hand. They'd agreed on this short break together, and he forced himself to pause. Better to honor the promise of rest now than to back out halfway and exhaust himself prematurely. A blade needed both sharpening and rest to stay razor keen, after all. Liang Jie looked up from her menu and called, "Nathan, what flavor are you going for?" Steam curled from bowls of noodles, skewered meats, and rich broths all around them. Nathan exhaled slowly, brushing off the tension. "Spicy," he replied, settling onto the bench beside her. Liang Jie laughed, a bright, easy sound. "You do love your heat." Their teammate chuckled from the other side, and for a moment the tension melted away. In the rising steam and the warm camaraderie, Nathan felt a renewed sense of purpose. The battlefield might be waiting once the exams ended, but right now, a fiery bowl of noodles and the company of his friends was exactly what he needed to steel himself for the challenges to come. Chapter 25, Level 3. Leisure time always flies by. Before Nathan knew it, the morning had slipped away. After lunch, the three of them went their separate ways. Nathan didn't waste a second. He went straight home and immediately resumed his training. Over the past half-month, a C-rank mission outside the village had pulled him away, delaying the promotion of his chakra refinement technique. What should have reached level 3 days ago was still stuck at level 2, sitting at 495 out of 500. Fortunately, he was on the brink of breaking through. At this rate, he'd make it before nightfall. With that thought, Nathan closed his eyes and sank into meditation, directing his awareness inward. Time stretched and folded. Minutes blurred into hours. By the time he opened his eyes again, the sun had already dipped below the western horizon, bathing the room in dim, fading light. Nathan sat up abruptly, his heart beating faster. He murmured to himself, "Level 3 at last?" A flush of excitement warmed him, but he forced himself calm. He closed his eyes once more and resumed the slow, steady work of refining chakra. An hour later, Nathan cracked open his eyes and called out, "Panel!" In an instant, the familiar pale blue curtain of light shimmered into view, displaying his current stats. Name, Uchiha Nathan, age 10, constitution 6, spirit 7, chakra 1650s, 2510 bloodline skill sharing, unawakened, 81, 85, 100. Ninja techniques, chakra refining technique, level 3, 1, 2, 1000. Clone technique, 270 of 430, 500. Transformation 2, 260, 420, 500. Substitution, level 2, 250 of 410, 500. Fire release, fireball technique, level 1, 30 of 50. 200 mirror hard art R2, 160, 500. Basic physical skills, level 2, 280 for 450/500. Ninja tool throwing, level 3, 1000. Chakra control, 3, 78, 1000. Nathan studied the numbers with a spark of satisfaction. His chakra refining technique had just advanced to level 3 again, boosting his chakra regeneration from 200 to 400 points per hour and raising his maximum gain per cycle from 4 to 8 points. Every upgrade brought him that much closer to awakening his Sharingan. With renewed determination, Nathan dismissed the panel and prepared to push his training even further. Nathan frowned as he surveyed his chakra reserves. They'd flatlined at 2,500 points a week ago and refused to budge. In theory, he'd naturally gain the next 10 points in time, but waiting wasn't an option. His level 3 chakra refining technique promised to raise his chakra ceiling by roughly 8 points per hour, an estimate so clear in his gut it felt indisputable. Yet that meager boost was worthless now. A week ago, Nathan's potential had hit its cap. Unless he improved his Shinobi rank or innate qualifications, any further chakra growth would come only through sheer, grueling effort. No tweak to the refining technique could overcome that barrier. Talent and technique ran on completely different tracks. For him, the only real benefit of his current skill level was rapid chakra restoration. He could still deepen his mastery, But without a higher-tier technique, he'd never tap the extra potential that might lie dormant within him. If he somehow elevated the refining technique to level 4 or beyond, then, should his Sharingan ever awaken, he might break through this ceiling and earn the qualifications he so desperately needed. But Nathan couldn't afford to wait for a fateful day that might never come. He needed a new path forward, and fast. Nathan stared at the training log on his wrist display, his jaw set. It wasn't that he lacked time, it was that he absolutely had to awaken his Sharingan before pushing his level any higher. The rules were clear. To raise the chakra refinement technique from level 3 to level 4, he needed 1,000 proficiency points. At the meager rate he'd been gaining, barely a point per hour, it meant 1,000 hours of rigorous practice. Even if he trained the full 8 hours his body would allow each day, that still worked out to 125 days, or just over months. He'd committed himself fully. Day in, day out, Nathan pushed his physical limits with strict nutrition and rest cycles, chaining as many 8-hour training sessions together as he could. Finally, after months of ceaseless effort, something shifted. His Sharingan flickered to life. Now, 2 weeks later, the progress bar read 85 out of 100. He'd only moved from 81 to 85, just 4 points, despite having gained 150 proficiency through the art of heart reflection. The numbers didn't seem to line up, but no matter. Awakening the Sharingan was the critical first step, and he'd achieved it. Meanwhile, the upgrade of his chakra refinement technique to level 3 had expanded his daily chakra pool from roughly 2,400 to 2,500 points to about 3,500. He dedicated 3,000 of those points each day to deepening his mastery of the art of heart reflection. With limited reserves left for other jutsu and recovery, every drop of chakra had to count. 4 months of grinding had delivered him to this moment. His body was lean, his mind sharpened, and the faint glow of the Sharingan in his eyes reminded him why he'd endured such a brutal regimen. There was still a long way to go, but Nathan was closer than ever to the power he sought, and he would not rest until he'd fully unlocked it. With the 15% chakra reduction granted by his level 3 chakra control, Nathan could boost his proficiency in the reflecting heart art by 17 to 18 points every single day. At that rate, his Sharingan progress would skyrocket. He'd confidently told himself he'd awaken the Sharingan in 4 months no matter what, but even that was a conservative estimate. By his calculations, in under 2 weeks, his reflecting heart art would hit level 3, triggering a massive power spike. Once that happened, his Sharingan would mature far sooner than he'd ever anticipated. Suppressing the restlessness in his chest, Nathan tore his gaze away from the Sharingan progress tracker and considered his other skills. Though they weren't his primary focus, they'd improved steadily. His 3-body technique sat at level 2, with 400 of the 500 required points already banked. As soon as these basic E-rank ninjutsu reached level 3, he'd be able to learn another jutsu, and he already had a short list of promising candidates. Nathan didn't need any new offensive jutsu for now. Between his fire style, great fireball technique, and the Sharingan he planned to master soon, his attack options were more than sufficient. His real problem was defense. There simply weren't any reliable ninjutsu in the ninja world that could stop a direct assault. The only practical answer was to improve his means of evasion and disguise. That brought him to the instant body technique. Among shinobi, instant body skills come in 3 flavors. 1. Ninjutsu-based. These rely on chakra-enhanced transformations of the environment. Gaara's sand instant body, Zabuza's mist-shrouded escapes, and Hanzo's fluid water cloak all belong here. Even the common D-rank, shadow clone-style instant body falls under this category. 2. Physical type. Rather than manipulating the environment, these techniques supercharge the user's own legs. Think of Might Guy's blazing footwork or the 4th Raikage's lightning-fast charge, both accomplished purely through muscle power amplified by chakra. 3. Space transfer type. This is the rarest and most potent form. Users teleport themselves from point A to point B in an instant without traversing the ground at all. The Flying Thunder God technique is the signature example. Nathan studied each variant carefully. He knew that mastering one, or even combining aspects of more than one, could make him virtually untouchable on the battlefield. Compared to the first two techniques, which were little more than tricks to momentarily boost your speed, the third method comes closest to true instantaneous movement jutsu. Yet Nathan's goal isn't the Flying Thunder God technique. It's not that he doesn't want it or doubts his ability to learn it. Thanks to his proficiency panel, with enough effort, he could force his way into almost any ninjutsu, including that S-rank teleportation art. In theory, all he'd need is the scroll detailing the Flying Thunder God technique, and he could master it. The problem is acquiring it. The Flying Thunder God technique is locked away in the Book of Seals, an S-rank vault no lowly genin can access. Nathan isn't Naruto, with a cheering squad smoothing out every obstacle. He has no sensei carving him a clear path to forbidden lore. So, for now, he's set his sights on a far more attainable skill, the ubiquitous D-rank instantaneous body movement technique. It may be common, but it's exactly the kind of jutsu a genin can actually learn on his own. Nathan considered his options. Just because a technique is widespread doesn't make it any less effective. It only proves its versatility, much like the shadow clone technique with its remarkable cost-to-benefit ratio. Fortunately, he could use it as a bridge to new abilities. As his power grew, even more possibilities would open up. He shifted his attention to two skills: basic physical techniques and ninja tool throwing. His basic physical techniques were already at level 2 with 450 out of 500 experience points. An upgrade was imminent. Meanwhile, ninja tool throwing had just advanced from level 2 to level 3, but then stalled at only 1 out of 1,000 proficiency. Nathan had anticipated this ceiling. Without the Sharingan's unique influence, ninja tool throwing couldn't progress further. He let out a quiet sigh. I still need the Sharingan. With resolve, Nathan closed his status panel and began refining his mastery of the Formless Mind technique, determined to break through his current limits. Nathan steadied himself on the tree limb as Ryosuke's voice crackled through his earpiece. "ZZ, Nathan, get ready to intercept. I'm on my way." "Copy that. I see it," Nathan replied, eyes fixed on the charging boar below. The enormous creature thundered through the underbrush, tusks glinting in the fading light. Nathan drew a kunai, aimed at the boar's head, and let it fly. The blade cut through the air like a bullet and buried itself in the beast's left eye. Blood spurted down the weapon's shaft as the boar let out a furious, pained roar. These Ninja World creatures were something else, massive, brutal, and astonishingly tenacious. Even a direct shot to the brain didn't guarantee an immediate takedown. "Time to finish this," Nathan muttered. He flicked his wrist, triggering the detonation tag attached to the kunai. In an instant, a crimson flame eruption engulfed the boar in searing heat. The beast howled and lashed out wildly, smashing into nearby trees. A powerful tremor rattled the very limb Nathan was perched on, forcing him to vault to a sturdier branch. Below him, the flaming boar's cries echoed through the forest, marking another ruthless encounter in the perilous ninja world. Nathan watched for a few heartbeats as the flames sputtered out. The savage boar finally stilled, collapsing onto the forest floor in scorched silence. He didn't move closer. Instead, he drew a kunai and, with deadly precision, sent it hurtling at the creature's other eye. The blade struck home with a sickening thunk, tearing through flesh. The boar jerked upright, bellowing in pain as it smashed through a row of saplings before crumpling again to the earth. Its chest heaved rapidly, proof that its earlier stillness had been a ruse. Nathan sniffed coldly. A beast is a beast. No matter how crafty, it ends up the same. Moments later, the ragged breath ceased altogether. Nathan sheathed his kunai. A soft whoosh in the clearing announced new arrivals. Ryosuke strode forward, Mizutani Shizuko at his side. Ryosuke surveyed the charred boar, its skull blackened by Nathan's detonating talisman, and shook his head. "Nathan, you're too wasteful," he scolded. "Ever heard of a fireball jutsu?" Shizuko offered a tight smile but said nothing, leaving Nathan to consider whether his friend had a point. "Why do you need to use a detonating talisman? It hardly makes sense to blow up a simple wild boar with something that expensive. Even factoring in the mission reward, you'd still be out of pocket. But talismans save chakra. Sure, Nathan could practice his fire release, say, a basic fireball technique, to hone his skills, but that's not his priority right now. If a small outlay of funds lets him conserve chakra for more important jutsu, it's money well spent. A week had passed since he'd first met Kakashi and the others. In that time, apart from eating, sleeping, and completing assigned tasks, Nathan had devoted every spare moment to training. His progress was remarkable. He'd brought all 3 core taijutsu arts up to level 3 mastery. Whether it was the simplest transformation technique or the notoriously tricky substitution technique, he could perform each in under a second. Many chunin couldn't claim such proficiency, and these were, after all, only E-rank ninjutsu. Nathan knew that for a chunin, perfecting this technique with enough dedication wasn't especially difficult. He glanced at his status screen and saw that his basic physical skill had just increased from level 2 to level 3. At first, he'd been hopeful. Much like the jump from level 1 to level 2, this upgrade might boost his physique again and raise his chakra ceiling. Instead, he felt a pang of disappointment. Reaching level 3 meant his basic physical skill was now perfect, comparable to the famed 3-body technique, yet his physical stats remained unchanged. Then again, Nathan reminded himself, if improving one's attributes were that easy, no ninja would ever stay a genin. Every real enhancement in physical fitness is a transformation in its own right. Even 1 or 2 such breakthroughs at the genin stage would grant enough chakra to climb straight to chunin status. In that light, it made perfect sense that a level 2 to 3 upgrade of a basic skill wouldn't alter his raw stats. True, tangible growth would require far more advanced physical techniques, those capable of triggering a genuine metamorphosis in body and chakra alike. Today's perfect skill was simply not enough. Nathan finally turned his attention to the art of reflecting the heart. Over the past 7 days, he had raised his proficiency by 125s, climbing from level 2, 260-500, to level 2, 385s, 500. That progress nudged his Sharingan awakening forward from 85-100 to 87-100, though the initial burst of speed had already plateaued. Now all he could do was wait for reflecting the heart to hit level 3. If the new tier delivered a strong enough bonus, maybe he'd unlock his Sharingan before the Chunin exam concluded. If not, he would have to enter the battlefield with nothing but his basic skills. Rumors had reached him that their graduating class would return to the front lines alongside the newly minted Chunin, news that made every drop of chakra feel priceless. He even shelved his plan to learn the teleportation jutsu, deciding instead to devote virtually all his remaining chakra to mastering reflecting the heart. Without the Sharingan as a trump card, Nathan felt uncomfortably exposed. A whirlwind of thoughts raced through his mind as he prepared for the challenges ahead. Nathan glanced at Ryosuke and Shizuko. This forest is crawling with beasts, and our orders are clear. We have to clear everything within a 10-kilometer radius, and at least 1/3 of them have to be killed. If we drive them off conventionally, we'll burn through too much chakra and waste precious time. Let's use some explosive seals to speed things up. He didn't wait for Ryosuke to protest. With a swift motion, Nathan pulled his kunai free from the boar's side and wiped it clean. I'm heading to Sector 2. Push the animals this way and keep them moving. Then he strode off into the trees, leaving Ryosuke and Shizuko exchanging puzzled looks. Ryosuke finally broke the silence. Shizuko, have you noticed Nathan's been a bit impatient lately? Shizuko nodded. Yeah, something's definitely changed. Shizuko had actually known about this for some time, but she'd kept it to herself. Now, as she and Ryosuke walked the deserted corridor, she finally spoke up. Do you know why? She asked softly. Ryosuke tilted his head, curiosity bright in his eyes. Maybe it's because of the Chunin exams. Shizuko raised an eyebrow. The Chunin exams? He shrugged. What does that have to do with us? We're not even taking part. Shizuko paused, glancing over her shoulder to make sure no one was nearby. Satisfied she was alone with Ryosuke, she lowered her voice to a whisper. My father heard that once the exams finish, the village plans to send our squad straight to the front lines, alongside the newly promoted Chunin. Ryosuke's face went pale. He blinked, then let out a strangled shout. What? He hated the mind-numbing drudgery of D-rank missions, but he knew all too well how deadly the battlefield could be, and he wasn't ready to volunteer for that fight. Shh! Shizuko Mizutani pressed a finger to her lips and leaned in. Keep your voice down. My father's forbidden me to share this, so don't spread it around. Ryosuke ducked his head in agreement. Got it. I won't say a word. Honestly, they were being overly cautious. Word of the matter was already making the rounds among the Jonin and the leading clans. Everyone would know soon enough. Still, Shizuko refused to take any chances. All right, Ryosuke, let's go. They fell into stride, moving swiftly but silently. After a moment's pause, Shizuko broke the hush again. Ryosuke? He snapped out of his reverie. Yeah? She gave a curt nod. Sector 3. Without another word, the two of them hurried off towards Sector 3. Chapter 27. Awakening. A month had passed in the blink of an eye. Today was the final round of the Konoha Chunin exams. Though it lacked the fanfare of the joint village tests in peacetime, the stands were still crowded with onlookers, everyone eager to see who would emerge next. Nathan, however, wasn't among them. He had bigger things on his mind. Seated cross-legged in his secluded training chamber, Nathan closed his eyes and summoned his status panel. The soft glow illuminated his face. Sharingan Awakening, 99-100, just 1 point from full activation. Below it, his reflection of the heart technique read level 3, 595-1000 proficiency. Exactly what he'd hoped for. The jump from level 2 to level 3 had been enormous. Under level 2, he'd stalled at 89-100 on his Sharingan progress. Now every 50 mastery points in the technique translated directly into a surge of awakening. For the past month, he'd funneled nearly every scrap of chakra he could spare into refining the reflection of the heart technique, and the results showed. Nathan opened his eyes, determination flashing in their deep crimson. Today would be the day he crossed that final threshold, and finally witnessed the full power of his Sharingan. Nathan's proficiency finally climbed to level 3, 595-1000. By the book, reaching 551,000 in the reflection of the heart technique should have triggered his Sharingan, but the last sliver of progress stubbornly refused to break through. Now, at 595-1000, he was still stuck. Yet a quiet certainty told him it was only a matter of time. Once he hit 600,000, the Sharingan would awaken. His heart hammered in his chest. Nathan closed his eyes and drew in several slow, steadying breaths until his mind and body were perfectly calm. Then he resumed the technique. 1, 3, 5 times. At last, the proficiency bar clicked over to level 3, 600,000. In the very next instant, as he performed the 6th cycle of the reflection of the heart technique, a spark of specialized chakra flared to life inside his brain, ignited by the technique's catalytic power. Nathan felt a sudden rush of chakra surging into his eyes, as though it had reached a critical threshold and was rewiring his optic nerves from the ground up. A sharp, itchy burn made him blink uncontrollably, and when he finally lowered his hand, he froze. In each iris gleamed a single, blood-red Magatama, his very own single Tomoe Sharingan. In an instant, the world snapped into razor-sharp focus. Dust motes floating in sunbeams hovered like tiny diamonds. He could trace the veins on leaves outside the window and pick out the faintest expressions on passers-by half a block away. It was as if his vision had leapt from 720p to full HD overnight. This is the Sharingan's vision, Nathan whispered, heart pounding. He took a steadying breath and bent his gaze inward. Though the Sharingan didn't grant him the Byakugan's ability to map every chakra meridian and pressure point, he could still sense chakra itself, its quantity, and the direction it flowed. Right now, his reserves were nearly depleted, all of his chakra coalescing around his head and concentrating in his eyes. Yet despite the strain, Nathan knew this power would change everything. Nathan realized that with his newly awakened Sharingan, the outcome of any future battle would be decided the moment he opened his eyes. He'd be able to perceive every slightest movement, every feint, shift of weight, or hidden strike, before his opponents even made them. Predicting an enemy's intentions in advance would give him a clear, overwhelming advantage. It wasn't for nothing that Shinobi whispered a warning to anyone facing an Uchiha. 1-on-1, run. 2-on-1, strike from behind. In a straight-up duel, if the gap in raw strength wasn't too great, the Sharingan's insight alone could turn the tide. But that insight was only the beginning. The Sharingan possessed 2 more potent abilities. hypnosis and replication. Hypnosis made its user impervious to ordinary genjutsu, while simultaneously magnifying the power of their own illus, ions, against foes. Replication, meanwhile, allowed an Uchiha to duplicate an enemy's taijutsu and ninjutsu simply by watching them in action. Of course, the effectiveness of these abilities depended largely on the Uchiha's own skill and conditioning. Copying an opponent's physical technique was one thing, mirroring the exact movement with the same fluidity, but without the necessary strength, speed, and endurance, the copied move could be useless or even injure its user. The same principle applied to ninjutsu. Understanding a technique was one matter, but having the chakra control and reserves to reproduce it safely and effectively was quite another. Nathan leaned back, closing his Sharingan with a deliberate blink. He ran through the lessons he'd painstakingly gathered about the copy wheel eye's limits. First and foremost, any ninjutsu dependent on a Kekkei Genkai, bloodline abilities, was off-limits. No matter how many times he observed the technique, he simply couldn't reproduce it. Second, elemental mismatch rendered a jutsu useless. Nathan's chakra was keyed to fire. Until he unlocked other nature transformations, he could only mimic fire-style techniques. And without an intimate grasp of how that chakra truly shifted and flared, any copied jutsu would be little more than an empty performance, smoke and mirrors without real power. That's why, among all the legendary Sharingan users, only Kakashi Hatake had earned the title Copy Ninja. His genius lay in mastering every chakra nature and overcoming those constraints. Closing his eyes, Nathan stilled his mind, sealed away the rushing crimson glow, and summoned his proficiency panel. The faint hum of data and skill ratings appeared before him, waiting for his next move. Nathan had expected it. The awakening of the Sharingan came with an immediate boost to his attributes. His physique jumped from 6 to 7, and his spirit shot up from 7 to 9. On paper, an increase of 1 point here and 2 points there might look trivial, but in reality, those extra points were anything but easy to earn. Attributes become exponentially harder to improve the higher they climb. Raising physical power from 6 to 7 was a modest challenge by Shinobi standards, but pushing mental strength from 7 all the way to 9 required at least 10 times the effort. Nathan felt a surge of pride and relief. He knew that these gains, however small they appeared, were the real proof of how far his Sharingan mastery had come. Nathan leaned back, considering the changes. The remarkable boost to his physical stats was really just a side effect of the deeper spiritual transformation. After all, the Sharingan is fundamentally a yin-based power. It makes perfect sense that awakening it would first accelerate his mental attributes. Any gains in strength, speed, or endurance were secondary, a natural consequence of his body adapting into its new, more refined chakra. In truth, the Sharingan awakening served mainly as a catalyst. His body needed time to integrate and build on that spiritual surge, laying down new foundations for tangible growth. The end result, however, was undeniable. Both his mental and physical potential had jumped to the next level. That meant his chakra-refining technique, once limited by his old thresholds, could now be used again to push his chakra capacity even higher. Nathan wasn't yet sure how far it would climb, but he was confident it wouldn't fall short of 1,500 points. Shifting his gaze to the bloodline abilities section of his status screen, Nathan noticed a major update. What had read Sharingan, unawakened, 9,900, was now Sharingan, single tomoe, 1,000. With the first tomoe finally manifesting, he felt the next stage of his power coming into view, and a new chapter in his journey poised to begin. If a progress bar appears, it means he can still evolve the ability by training his proficiency, just as before. Exactly how to train it, though, remains untested, and the chakra cost of the Sharingan is another unknown that demands careful experimentation. Nathan doesn't want to find himself, in the middle of a fight, suddenly run out of chakra and suffer a disastrous fate. With the proficiency panel, he can measure every drain on his reserves and keep his power under precise control. Chapter 28. Plan. In the blink of an eye, another week had slipped by. The departure date for the front lines was fast approaching, and the announcement had finally gone public. Their graduating class, alongside newly promoted Chunin, Genin, who hadn't passed their exam, and a host of clan shinobi would be sent straight into Rain Country. Nathan pressed his back against the wall and exhaled softly. If there was one place he didn't want to be deployed, it was Rain Country. Nestled between wind, earth, and fire territories, and ringed by several minor fiefs, it has always been a flashpoint. In the great shinobi wars of the past, every major power committed troops there, and this conflict would be no different. From the sand and rock villages to Konoha's forces, from mercenary bands to the Rain Nation's own warriors, the field would teem with combatants. Even the Akatsuki under Yahiko had sent agents. Covert operatives from Hidden Cloud and Hidden Mist prowled in the shadows. Open armies and hidden cells alike would collide on that rain-soaked terrain, making alliances fragile and the entire campaign frighteningly unpredictable. As the reality of it all sank in, Nathan felt the knot in his stomach tighten, even more than it had when he first learned he'd graduated. This was war, and Rain Country was waiting. Nathan knew all too well the dangers waiting in the Rain Country. A single misstep there could trigger a brutal, no-holds-barred fight to the death. Over time, the region had earned a grim reputation as a ninja graveyard, a merciless meat grinder of battle. Survival odds for shinobi deployed there were far worse than anywhere else. He had no desire to go, but that choice wasn't his to make. Deserting the village was out of the question. He'd need an arsenal of forbidden ninjutsu from both the Uchiha clan and Konoha itself, skills he simply couldn't obtain without becoming a rogue ninja. Even though he had activated his Sharingan, his abilities barely measured up to a Chunin's. That level of power stood no chance against the relentless pursuit of Konoha's Anbu, and the outside world offered no sanctuary. The black market was always abuzz for Sharingan eyes, and once Nathan's identity leaked, bounty hunters would swarm like vultures. He refused to spend his life hounded from shadow to shadow. Better, he decided, to accept the village's orders and face the Rain Country head-on than to risk turning fugitive. Nathan braced himself. With the Sharingan as his hidden ace and the proficiency panel guiding his growth, he was certain that if he could just hang on a little longer, his life would be out of danger. He summoned the panel, and a pale blue curtain of light swirled into view. Name, Uchiha Nathan, age 11. Physique, 7. Spirit, 9. Chakra, 1,450. 2,570, 3,018. Bloodline limit, Sharingan, single Magatama, 1,000, 31,000. Skills, Chakra Refinement Technique, Liv 3, 266,000, 322, 1,000. Fire Release, Great Fireball Technique, Liv 1, 5,200. Reflection of the Heart Technique, Liv 3, 601, 1,000, 683, 1,000. Ninja Tool Throwing, Liv 3, 1,000. Chakra Control, Liv 3, 102,000. 3 Body Technique, Liv 3, 0. Basic Physical Technique, Liv 3, 0. Over the past week, Nathan had rigorously tested the Sharingan's chakra consumption and charted how quickly his mastery improved. He finally had clear answers. 1. Idle consumption. Simply activating the Sharingan without engaging in combat sapped only a trickle of chakra each minute, almost negligible. 2. Combat consumption. The moment a battle began, the chakra drain spiked, varying with the intensity of each clash. Armed with this knowledge, Nathan steeled himself for whatever came next, confident he could manage his reserves and turn his trump card into victory. Nathan reviewed the Sharingan's mechanics as he sat cross-legged in the dimly lit training chamber. He reminded himself that the more complex the situation he faced, the more chakra the Sharingan would draw. And the Rev V, or SC, held true too. Simply opening the eyes without doing anything wasn't taxing. He could theoretically leave his Sharingan active all day with no ill effects. But during a high-intensity fight, where he stimulated its power or unleashed genjutsu, his chakra reserves could be drained in 10 or 20 minutes. That said, Nathan didn't plan to throw himself into a protracted, dangerous battle anytime soon. With that concern set aside, he turned his attention to how he might raise his mastery of the Sharingan. Fortunately, the long-dormant reflection of the heart technique still functioned. Before awakening the Sharingan, Nathan would have needed dozens of proficiency points in that technique just to nudge his ocular skill forward. Now, he found that every 10 points of reflection of the heart proficiency translated directly into 1 point of Sharingan mastery. Nathan allowed himself a small, wry smile. If enhancing his Sharingan really was that straightforward, he certainly wouldn't object, though he suspected the path to accruing those 10 points day after day of intensive practice would prove its own kind of challenge. Nathan knew that mastering the reflection of the heart technique came at a steep price. Each single point of Sharingan proficiency cost him 1,700 chakra. With his daily chakra ceiling hovering around 3,500 points, he could afford at most 2 proficiency points per day. But evolving his 1-tomo Sharingan into a 2-tomo Sharingan demanded a full 1,000 proficiency points. At 2 points a day, that works out to 500 days, nearly a year and a half. Nathan couldn't stomach such a slow grind. Fortunately, during a series of Sharingan consumption tests, he stumbled on a far more efficient route. He noticed that simply keeping his Sharingan active for long stretches also pushed the proficiency gauge upward. By tracking the meter, he confirmed that the eye's continuous activation steadily boosted his skill level. After a few experiments, he nailed down the conversion rate. Every 5 hours of cumulative open eye time earned him 1 proficiency point, and it cost only about 300 chakra, over 4/5 less than the 1,700 points required by the reflection of the heart technique. Armed with this discovery, Nathan set out to maximize his daily open eye hours, confident that he could fast-track his Sharingan evolution without draining his chakra reserves. By my calculations, Nathan's Sharingan proficiency shouldn't be stuck at just 30 points. There are only 24 hours in a day, and once you factor in meals and sleep, he's got barely 10 hours each day to hone his eyes. In 7 days, he's only managed to rack up 29 points, and that's largely thanks to the 8 points he gained from the reflection of the heart technique, plus the fact that he hasn't been disturbed and can keep his Sharingan activated for long stretches. Remove those advantages, and his score would be even lower. That's why he can't afford to interrupt his training in reflection of the heart. If he wants to keep the very existence of the Sharingan under wraps, he needs to keep sharpening that technique. It's the fastest path to boosting his Sharingan proficiency and eventually evolving it into the 2 Magatama stage. Of course, he can't rush it. Such progress must come naturally. In just a few days, Nathan will be thrown into the thick of battle, and right now, his toolkit feels woefully inadequate. Over the next few days, he plans to broaden his skill set and fill out his skill bar, so he'll be ready for whatever awaits on the front lines. Nathan had 3 urgent priorities. First and foremost, he had to master the body flicker technique. As a means of saving lives on the battlefield, there was no time to waste. He needed to be able to vanish and reappear in an instant whenever his comrades were in peril. Second, Nathan was determined to learn the 2 remaining fire-style jutsu his parents had bequeathed him in his previous life, Phoenix Fire Technique and Dragon Fire Technique. Phoenix Fire would give him a powerful L-group attack capability, essential for holding his ground against multiple opponents, while Dragon Fire would furnish a strong mid-range strike to keep enemies at bay. Finally, with his Sharingan now awakened, it was vital that he deepen his mastery of Genjutsu. Up to now, he only knew the reflection heart technique, useful for hastening his Sharingan's evolution, but hardly ideal for ensnaring foes. Fortunately, his parents had left him another illusion, the Phantom Shackle technique. By combining that ability with his eye's power, Nathan would turn deception into a weapon every bit as deadly as flame or lightning. Time was of the essence. Armed with these 5 techniques, Body Flicker, Phoenix Fire, Dragon Fire, Reflection Heart, and Phantom Shackle, Nathan would be ready to face whatever horrors awaited him on the upcoming battlefield. This isn't just any illusion. It was created specifically for the Sharingan, and Nathan has what it takes to master it flawlessly. Chapter 29, Race Against Time, Zian Chou Mao Yin, Fire Release, Fengshan Fire Technique. Nathan's hands moved in a blur, weaving 6 hand seals with the precision of a dancer before he drew in a deep breath and unleashed a torrent of flame. Fiery orbs shot from his mouth like burning seeds, streaking toward the cluster of trees ahead. Sharingan, he called, and in an instant his eyes blazed blood red. The black magatama in his pupils spun like miniature windmills, granting him razor-sharp perception. With each flicker of insight, Nathan adjusted his aim, directing the flaming projectiles at 7 or 8 towering trunks. Bang! 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 Explosions rocked the grove as each ember ball slammed into wood and bark. The brilliant conflagrations lit up the clearing, but this spectacle wasn't mere showmanship. The dazzling flames were designed to distract, concealing Nathan's true intent and setting the stage for a single, decisive strike. Nathan decided to push his attack even further, with shurikens. He formed another hand seal, channeled his ninjutsu, then swiftly drew several shurikens and hurled them at the tree. The flames lashed against the bark, but the flaming shurikens, already glowing hot, arrived a heartbeat sooner. They slammed into the trunk, scorching the wood black around the impact points. If those fiery blades struck a person, the results would be catastrophic. Flesh and bone would sear instantly, and any victim unlucky enough to take the blow would likely collapse in agony, or worse. The combination of physical projectiles and elemental fire made the technique as deadly as it was dramatic. The only downside was how expendable the shurikens became once they'd been heated to red-hot temperatures. Each one was a single-use weapon, and Nathan's ninja tool bag could only hold so many. He knew he couldn't afford to waste them. This burning shuriken trick was a last-resort move, to be unleashed only when the stakes were highest. Nathan drew his focus inward, then withdrew his thoughts and summoned his proficiency panel. A familiar translucent blue screen materialized before him, displaying his current status. Name, Uchiha. Nathan, age 11, constitution, 7 spirit, 9, chakra points, 3,210 from 318. Bloodline, Sharingan, single magatama, level 1, 51,000 from 30. Core techniques, chakra refining technique, level 3, 346 1,000 from 322. Chakra control, level 3, 102 1,000. The art of reflecting the heart, level 3, 683,000. 3 body technique, level 3, 00. Basic physical skills, level 3, WIM. Ninjutsu fire release, fireball technique, level 1, 5,200. Phoenix immortal fire technique, level 1, 5,200. Dragon fire technique, level 1, 1,200. Magic, Yaohong art, level 1, 200. Taijutsu and tools, blinking technique, level 1, 10,200. Ninja tool throwing, level 3, 60,101. Nathan studied the data for a moment. It had been 10 days since he first awoke in this world, and 3 days since he began his rigorous training in the fire release, Phoenix immortal fire technique. Satisfied that his progress was on track, he closed the panel and prepared for the next stage of his cultivation. Nathan's early mastery of the fire release, Great Fireball technique made it far easier for him to take on the fire release, Phoenix immortal fire technique, and his progress was swift. After just 30 repetitions, he earned 100 proficiency points and rose from level 0 to level 1. Although the base chakra cost for Phoenix immortal fire was 3,000 points, his level 3 chakra control, 102 1,000, trimmed that expense by 15.5%. So each casting consumed only about 2,500 points. Emboldened by this achievement, Nathan turned his attention next to the fire release, Dragon's Fire technique. Having already studied both the Great Fireball and the Phoenix Immortal Fire, he carried a far deeper understanding of fire-natured chakra into the new jutsu. In the course of his training, he had quietly absorbed the fundamental principles of molding, G-Flame, insights essential to mastering any fire-based ninjutsu. Nathan's training paid off quickly. When he practiced the fire style, Dragon Flame Escape, he found that his efforts were effectively doubled, twice the result for half the effort. After fewer than 40 attempts, he'd earned enough proficiency to perform the technique flawlessly. Even with chakra savings from his chakra control, he still expended roughly 3,000 chakra points refining the Dragon Flame Escape. Combined with the 2,500 points he'd spent mastering fire style, Phoenix Flame, his total used chakra reached 5,500. Over the next 3 days, Nathan had access to about 10,000 chakra points in total. He devoted the remainder to 2 more jutsu, the Magic Shaolin Illusion and the Body Flicker technique. The Magic Shaolin Illusion, an illusion custom-built for the Sharingan, proved straightforward for him. After roughly 20 repetitions and just over 1,000 chakra points, Nathan had it down pat. During this phase of practice, he noticed something intriguing. His Sharingan proficiency was skyrocketing. Intrigued, Nathan set about analyzing and experimenting to uncover the reason. By tightening his control over both the Phoenix and Dragonfire styles, he finally unlocked the secret behind his accelerated Sharingan growth. Nathan considered the problem and realized it was straightforward: use it or lose it. The more he actively exercised his Sharingan, the faster his mastery would grow. By his calculations, aggressive training was roughly twice as efficient as simply keeping the eye open and waiting for proficiency to tick upward. The drawback, of course, was chakra consumption. Nathan estimated he'd burn around 1,000 chakra points for each single point of Sharingan proficiency, lower than the 1,700 points required by the heart reflection technique, but still more than 3 times the 300 points used in passive grinding. With his current chakra reserves, he simply couldn't sustain that level of expenditure. He knew that once his chakra pool expanded, however, this luxury method would become feasible. The key lay in his chakra refining technique. As long as he maintained, and ideally raised its level, his daily chakra yield would climb. At that point, he could afford the drain and push his Sharingan to new heights of proficiency far faster than before. Nathan paused to consider the added bonus of his training method. It not only built raw strength, but also sharpened the proficiency of any allied technique. Wiping a smear of sweat from his lip, he turned his full attention to the instant body technique. As a D-rank ninjutsu, it normally costs just 30 chakra points per activation, trivial enough for endless practice. But now that he'd elevated it to level 1, the base cost had climbed to 50 points, and extending its range or speed would demand even more. Nathan refused to waste precious chakra during drills. Building mastery was all that mattered. A soft crunch of footsteps in the underbrush snapped him to alertness. In one fluid motion, he formed the seals, drew in a breath, and unleashed a titanic fireball from his mouth. The blazing sphere shot between 2 towering trees, slamming into the forest with a thunderous roar. Flames leapt outward in a furious wave, consuming brush and bark alike. Chapter 30. Departure. Bang, bang, bang! The sharp cracks of chakra-infused strikes echoed across the training ground. Nathan looked up, spotted his target, then sprang into motion, closing the distance in 2 quick bounds. "Lord Uchiha!" he called, coming to a respectful halt and offering a crisp salute. Uchiha Feihuo, only 18, yet already famed throughout the clan for a fully awakened 3-tomo Sharingan, acknowledged him with a curt nod. Nathan thought back to his memories of a previous life, wondering how someone so talented had gone unmentioned. Did Feihuo fall in the last great Shinobi war, die on a secret mission, or become one of Itachi's many casualties? Whatever the truth, the young Uchiha, unaware of Nathan's private speculations, simply surveyed the courtyard with faint approval. "You've refined your fireball technique nicely," Feihuo remarked, his tone casually approving. Before Nathan could reply, the young Uchiha reached into his sleeve and produced a tightly rolled scroll. With a practiced flick of his wrist, he tossed it to Nathan. "Here," he said, "is the shadow clone technique you requested." Nathan caught the scroll without hesitation, determination sparking in his eyes. This mission was only the beginning, and he intended to make every jutsu count. "Remember, don't spread this around." Nathan had already mastered, or was in the final stages of mastering, Fire Release, Phoenix Immortal Flame, Fire Release, Dragon's Breath, the mystical Shaolin technique, and the instant body technique. Now he intended to claim the one remaining perk granted to every Uchiha shinobi who graduates as a genin, the right to learn an additional clan jutsu, whether ninjutsu, an illusion, or a taijutsu. Since his graduation, Nathan had never taken advantage of this benefit. But with a major mission on the horizon and no telling when he'd return, he refused to let the opportunity slip by. More importantly, he was eager to add the shadow clone technique to his repertoire. As he progressed, each new skill demanded exponentially greater proficiency and chakra control, far more than he could develop through solo practice. The shadow clone technique offered the perfect solution. By creating physical duplicates and then absorbing their experiences and memories back into himself, Nathan could effectively multiply his training time and refine his jutsu more rapidly than ever before. Exactly how efficient the method would prove remained to be seen, but Nathan was ready to find out. Nathan tucked the scroll under his arm and gave it a quick once-over. Satisfied that nothing was missing or tampered with, he nodded his thanks to Uchiha Feihuo. With a casual wave, Feihuo turned on his heel and disappeared into the trees without a backward glance. As soon as Feihuo was out of sight, Nathan settled onto the damp earth and unfurled the parchment once more. His eyes scanned every line, every seal, making certain no hidden trap or illicit notation lay buried within. Only after he'd convinced himself the coast was clear did he roll the scroll back up and stow it safely in his satchel. He knew better than anyone how dangerous this scroll could be. It contained secrets capable of changing the balance of power in the shinobi world. If even one fragment of its knowledge fell into the wrong hands, the consequences would be unthinkable. That's why he'd been so quick to unleash his fire release, fireball technique the moment someone dared approach. It wasn't recklessness, but precaution. When wielded with the Sharingan, fire-style jutsu attain a level of precision and control that ordinary Uchiha can't match. Take the Phoenix Fire technique, for example. Any Uchiha can perform it with closed eyes, but only with the Sharingan can its flames dance exactly where you intend. Nathan had to remain alert. In this line of work, a single lapse in caution could cost him everything. Most people wouldn't notice such subtle tells, but any seasoned Uchiha, especially one with the Sharingan activated, could spot something off in an instant. If Nathan wasn't careful, the secret of his awakened Sharingan would be blown. He couldn't gamble on whether the approaching shinobi was an Uchiha, or whether they even had the eyes to see through his disguise, so he decided to eradicate all traces of his training. Even on ordinary days, Nathan kept his chakra level capped at 2,000 points. Sensor-type dojutsu, Sharingan, Byakugan, and the like allow perceptive ninjas to estimate another shinobi's chakra reserves and, by extension, their true strength. 2,000 points was his safety line. Any lower, and he might be overwhelmed by a sudden threat. Any higher, and he could draw unwelcome attention. Though he was just a low-rank ninja and didn't expect anyone to single him out, Nathan refused to take chances. He would not let his chakra exceed that threshold. Nathan needed an extraordinary amount of chakra to hone his skills, but thanks to his unique training, he'd learned to regulate exactly how much chakra he held in reserve. What gnawed at him now was whether he could sustain that balance once he set out with his team for the Land of Rain in a few days. The trip wouldn't be peaceful. Inside the Fire Country, potential enemies might hold back, wary of igniting a full-scale war on home soil. Beyond its borders, however, every ambush would be fair game. If he ran dry of chakra and walked into a trap, disaster would follow. Nathan paused mid-stride, exhaled in frustration, and muttered to himself, "I just hope more reinforcements join us before we leave. Otherwise, we'll be in over our heads." Shaking off his doubts, he turned back to the training field and resumed drilling the blink body technique, his ace-in-the-hole escape maneuver. If he was ever cornered, this would be his only way out. He pushed himself to cast it faster, more fluidly, until exhaustion set in. 3 days later came in the blink of an eye. That morning, Nathan dressed crisply in his shinobi uniform, strapped on his tool pouch, secured his forehead protector, hoisted his backpack, and stepped out of his quarters into the clear dawn. The road to the Land of Rain lay before him, and with it, every challenge he had prepared for. Nathan wove through the winding streets and narrow alleys, heart-pounding as he made his way toward the assembly point. Every so often, he passed fellow shinobi, clad in the same flak jackets, hoisting bundles of gear or shouldering packs, all heading for the Great Gate of Konoha. Today was departure day. Everyone had to gather here first, verify the head count, then set out together for the Rain Kingdom battlefield. A few minutes later, Nathan arrived at the village entrance. Dozens of his comrades were already clustered around, and a row of carts stood ready, some piled high with food supplies, others laden with tools and weapons. This was the lifeline of any military campaign. From his past life's hard lessons to the present one, Nathan knew how crucial logistics could be. No matter how powerful the shinobi, a stalled supply line meant defeat. He watched as Jonin officers barked orders to their squads, ensuring every crate and pack was properly secured. It was comforting to see so many seasoned seniors, especially those born into Konoha's established families, overseeing the operation. Nathan felt a weight lift off his shoulders. With only 2,000 chakra points to his name, he couldn't afford to burn out in a prolonged engagement. Having capable leaders around meant he could focus on performing at his best when it mattered. As the final checks were called, Nathan took a steadying breath. Soon they would be on the road, escorting this all-important convoy straight into enemy territory. No turning back now. He squared his shoulders, tightened the straps on his pack, and readied himself for the march ahead. Nathan ultimately decided to stick with his current approach. He refused to believe he'd be so unlucky as to face an opponent he couldn't handle with 2,000 chakra points. Even if he did encounter someone stronger, he could always retreat. Nathan, over here, scanning the crowd, he recognized Ryosuke's voice. He turned to see Ryosuke and Furukawa standing next to a supply cart, waving him over. Nathan jogged across the clearing and reached them. Before Ryosuke could ask, Furukawa spoke first. "How's the body flicker technique going?" Nathan smiled. He'd learned that jutsu, sometimes called the instant body technique, from Furukawa himself. It wasn't one of the ninjutsu his parents had left him in his previous life, and he didn't want to use up a clan slot on a mere D-rank skill. Instead, he approached Furukawa, who, as the lead jonin and instructor, was obliged to teach his students whatever they needed. Although Furukawa had originally planned to wait until Nathan became a chunin, he'd agreed to teach the technique as soon as Nathan asked. "I've been practicing," Nathan replied confidently. "I can almost turn invisible at will, just need to polish the timing." Furukawa nodded. "Good. Keep at it. A well-executed body flicker can be the difference between life and death on the field." Ryosuke chimed in with a grin. "Just don't vanish from sight when we need your backup." Nathan laughed. "Don't worry. I'll be right where you can see me. Unless, of course, disappearing is exactly what we need." As the three of them prepared to move out, Nathan felt a surge of determination. With 2,000 chakra points and a solid plan, he was ready for whatever lay ahead. Nathan had once unleashed a C-rank ninjutsu, fire style, great fireball technique, in front of Furukawa, so the older shinobi knew full well that a simple D-rank skill was beneath him. A few days later, Furukawa checked in again. Quietly, Nathan summoned his skill panel and took a quick look. His blinking body technique had just bumped up from level 1, 10,200, to level 2, 15,500. At this new level, he could vanish and reappear in under a second. Still determined to keep a low profile, Nathan merely nodded. "I've learned it." "Is that so?" Guchuan replied, offering nothing more. Chapter 31. Ambush. "Nathan, have you really mastered it?" Liangji's voice trembled with barely contained excitement as he leaned forward. Furukawa said nothing, his face a perfect mask. Liangji glanced at him, hoping for some sign, but the older man remained inscrutable. Frustration bubbled up in Liangji's chest. He'd always known Nathan was exceptionally quick to learn, but watching him breeze through the instant body technique, an advanced skill Liangji himself had struggled to grasp, stung his pride. A few days ago, when Furukawa began teaching Nathan the fundamentals, he hadn't held back. Determined not to lose face, Liangji had shadowed every lesson. He'd practiced relentlessly, finally stringing together a basic sequence of movements. It wasn't enough for the battlefield. He couldn't deploy it under pressure, but in private drills, he could execute the form flawlessly. For once, Liangji felt proud of his progress, sure that when Nathan reported his own abilities, they would be roughly on par. But Nathan never exaggerated. Through months of traveling together, Liangji had learned that Nathan's quiet humility concealed genuine talent. If Nathan claimed mastery, Liangji knew his skill level must far surpass anything Liangji himself had achieved. Silence stretched between them. Liangji's mind raced. Was he about to see something extraordinary? Before he could second-guess himself, Nathan nodded once, calmly. With a single breath, Nathan vanished. One moment, he stood before Furukawa and Liangji. The next, he was gone. Liangji spun on his heel, searching the room, no trace. Then from behind, Nathan's voice whispered softly in Liangji's ear. "Ready?" Caught off guard, Liangji stumbled, but managed to twist just in time. He caught sight of Nathan's form flickering like a phantom in the corner of his vision. Reflexively, Liangji dropped into a defensive stance, eyes locked on nothing and everywhere at once. Furukawa watched, expression unchanging, as Nathan materialized directly behind Liangji with unnatural speed. Without warning, Nathan delivered a precise strike, a soft tap to Liangji's shoulder that carried the force of a cannon. Liangji staggered forward, blinking, astonished by the power contained in such a brief contact. Nathan reappeared in front of him and bowed politely. "You asked if I'd really learned it," he said. "That was the instant body technique." Liangji straightened, awe mixing with envy. "I can't believe it," he admitted, rubbing his shoulder. "You've surpassed me again." Nathan offered a wry smile. "There's still much to refine," he replied, "but I'll teach you everything I know." As Liangji recovered his composure, Furukawa finally cracked a thin smile. The ambush, though gentle, had spoken volumes. Nathan's promise to share his hard-won skill sealed a new bond between the three, preparing them for the real battles yet to come. Nathan watched Ryosuke standing off to the side, his expression clouded with frustration. He'd missed the group's last two gatherings, and Nathan knew exactly why, yet he stayed silent. Instead, he cleared his throat and asked, "Where's Shizuko? Hasn't she shown up yet?" In the past, Shizuko Mizutani was always the first to arrive. Now, as Nathan checked his watch, he realized they were cutting it close to the meeting time, and still no Shizuko. He frowned. Did something happen to her? Beside him, Ryosuke shrugged, voice low, "I don't know." Just then, Ryosuke's eyes snapped to the village entrance. Nathan followed his gaze and saw Shizuko hurrying down the main path, her pace urgent. Ryosuke raised a hand and called, "Shizuko, over here!" At his voice, Shizuko spun around. When she spotted them, she forced a tight smile and quickened her steps. Before she even reached them, Ryosuke stepped forward, concern edging his tone. "You're late today. Everything all right?" Shizuko Mizutani shook her head, forcing a smile. "It's nothing," she said softly. "I just slept in." Ryosuke reached up and tapped his chin thoughtfully. "Is that so? You should set an alarm so you don't oversleep again. That's what I do." As Ryosuke continued to tease her, Nathan watched the exchange with uneasy curiosity. Was Ryosuke genuinely trying to help, or simply distracting Shizuko from her real turmoil? It was obvious to anyone paying attention that she hadn't simply overslept. Her eyes were red and swollen, proof that she had been crying not long ago. With the team about to head into battle, the tears could only have come from one source: the painful farewells she just said to her family. Nathan felt a sobering clarity settle over him. This was no game. War was real here, with real consequences. Ninjas weren't faceless soldiers running on slogans. They were people with families, friends, and dreams. Every life lost would leave a trail of grief and heartbreak behind, and nobody, not even the bravest among them, was immune to that truth. Many fear war, yet they're bound by laws and age-old beliefs, left with no choice but to accept it. Nathan let out a quiet sigh, chastising himself for dwelling on such dark thoughts, and turned his attention back to the task at hand, waiting for the squad to move out. Minutes passed. At last, the teams assembled in formation, and the third Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice rang out like thunder, every word stoking the fires of resolve. He spoke of duty, of protection, of the very soul of their village, and when he urged them to stand firm against the coming storm, the younger Chunin and Geinin straightened instinctively, hearts pounding with eager anticipation. They longed to charge into battle, to strike down the enemy with their own hands. Even Shizuko Mizutani, whose mood had been as dark as an overcast sky, felt her lips curl into a faint smile at Hiruzen's stirring appeal. Only the Jonin remained impassive, their faces as calm and unyielding as stone. And yet Nathan knew why. These veteran warriors had waded through oceans of blood, witnessed comrades fall, and endured horrors no speech could erase. If the village needed to marshal their full strength, it would take more than fervent words. It would demand real rewards or the clear, unshakable promise of justice. Nathan couldn't help but wonder, why would anyone heed you if you're just making things up? Just because you're Hokage? The Hokage isn't even elected by the people. He shook his head, determined to stop overthinking it. Politics and titles were miles away from his concerns. He had no desire to get tangled up in them. In the end, the ninja world respected strength above all else. As long as you were powerful, your fists spoke louder than words. Didn't like someone? Knock them down and move on. Why waste time pondering etiquette or legitimacy? If power was the only currency that mattered, then the most direct path to command was to grow stronger. A few minutes later, the official ceremonies concluded, and the expedition set off. Nathan glanced around, counting roughly 30 jonin and another 60 or 70 special jonin assigned as escorts. The roster of chunin and genin swelled those numbers to nearly 400. Dozens of supply wagons lumbered along at the rear, each fully loaded with provisions and gear. With such a vast convoy, progress was inevitably slow. It took them 2 full weeks to traverse the Land of Fire's borders and finally step onto the war-torn fields of the Land of Rain. As the landscape darkened with storm clouds on the horizon, Nathan steeled himself for whatever awaited them beyond. Nathan's unit crept into the Land of Rain beneath a steady drizzle that often veiled the sun for days on end. Muddy trails and sodden cloaks slowed their advance to a crawl. A week later, they reached a great, yawning canyon. After fording the chasm, they pressed on for another dozen miles until Konoha's forward camp appeared through the mist, their final destination and the rendezvous point for the dozens of lumbering supply trucks trailing behind them. Nathan paused at the canyon rim, staring into the gloomy abyss. Even as a battlefield novice, he knew this terrain was perfect for an ambush. He couldn't believe the veteran shinobi leading the mission had chosen such a precarious route, unless Konoha's position here was far more desperate than anyone let on. Reducing the column to a cautious crawl, the senior ninjas immediately dispatched scout teams to fan out ahead and climb the cliffs on either side, searching every ledge and shadow for hidden traps before the convoy dared move deeper into the gorge. Nathan edged forward with his squad, every heartbeat echoing in the cavern's heavy stillness. Minute by minute, they inched along the rocky corridor, senses straining for any hint of danger. Then, without warning, a thunderous blast shattered the silence. From a distant section of the rock wall, a crimson fireball roared skyward, illuminating the jagged chamber in a hellish glow. "Detonation tag! Ambush!" someone shouted, panic rippling through the ranks. Soldiers stumbled over one another, weapons clattering against stone as fear took hold. Before chaos could spiral out of control, the senior ninja's firm voice cut through the din. "Hold your ground. Form up on me." At his command, the team snapped to attention. Nathan drew a steadying breath, gripping his kunai as order returned, ready to face whatever lay beyond the flames. Chapter 32. The First Battle. Everyone, form a defensive perimeter. The sharp command rang out from the front of the squad. Instantly, the chunin sprang into action, guiding the genin around them to take up positions based on proximity. The specialist jonin also moved with practiced precision. The close combat fighters rushed forward to bolster the reconnaissance teams, while the sensory operatives settled into meditation, weaving jutsu to probe for hidden threats. Every other ninja slid seamlessly into their roles. Their coordination was so smooth, it was as if they'd drilled it 100 times over. Each member knew exactly where to go and what to do. Nathan stood among the newcomers, still unsure of himself. He watched as the chunin barked orders and the seasoned jonin executed complex maneuvers, feeling like a puppet whose strings had been pulled into place. Anxiety coiled in his chest. He had practiced his own skills countless times on the training field, but this was real. The responsibility weighed on him, and he could almost taste his fear. He resisted the urge to panic. Acting on impulse would only endanger himself and his comrades. So he followed the nearest chunin's instructions without hesitation, planting his feet firmly and adopting a ready stance. Nathan reminded himself, stay alert, obey orders, and trust in the team. In a situation like this, a lone genin had no room to shine. Discipline and unity would be their true strength. Over the past 3 weeks, Nathan's training time was razor-thin amid the crowds and last-minute preparations. He carved out just 3 to 4 hours a day for practice, allocating roughly 1,500 chakra points each session. To fly under the radar, he devoted all that chakra to the reflection of the heart technique. As a result, His proficiency climbed from level 3, 683,000, to level 3, 875,000, a gain of 192 points. That incremental boost also sharpened his Sharingan, raising it by 9 points to 69,000. Small as it was, Nathan knew every bit of progress counted. At the same time, he kept refining his chakra refining technique. Sticking to the same daily routine and pushing himself to the limit during the final 3 days before departure, he elevated that skill from level 3, 346,000, to level 3, 454,000. The payoff was immediate. His overall chakra capacity swelled by 864 points, bringing his total to 4,074. Still, Nathan could feel his body approaching its current ceiling. He estimated that once his chakra limit neared 5,000 points, his growth would likely stall, presenting a fresh hurdle on the path ahead. Nathan hovered in midair, taking in the chaos below. A thunderous explosion rocked the cliffside, and the clash of steel rang out almost immediately afterward. He squinted down to see Iwagakure Jonin locked in combat with their Konoha counterparts, while a dozen Iwagakure Chunin pressed in from the flanks. Realizing no one had noticed him yet, Nathan quietly activated his Sharingan. Instantly, his world snapped into razor-sharp focus. Through his enhanced vision, he spotted the Chunin slipping between the battling Jonin and quickly molding a sequence of hand seals. In unison, they pressed their palms against the rock face above the Konoha fighters, clearly attempting to seal them in. "Now!" Nathan muttered, heart racing. He shut off his Sharingan and hauled on the arms of Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko, yanking them out of the blast zone. Both staggered, surprised by the sudden pull, but instinctively trusted Nathan's lead. No sooner had they landed a few feet away than a deafening crack split the air. A section of the cliff exploded outward, showering debris where they had just stood. Nathan steadied himself, adrenaline surging, as the dust settled around them, and the real fight began. Then a torrent of stones, boulders, and pebbles alike rained down around Nathan, striking the canyon floor like a meteor shower. Dust and debris filled the air as Genin scattered, desperately seeking cover. These young shinobi weren't much tougher than ordinary people. A direct hit could maim or kill them. Within moments, the cloud of dust settled, and a fine drizzle of mud spattered their faces. "Thanks to you, Nathan," Ryosuke called out, genuine relief in his voice. A Chunin might shrug off a rock slide, but for Genin, especially newly promoted ones, the danger was all too real. Around them lay more than a dozen fellow genin, some motionless, others groaning under the weight of rubble. Nathan's heart pounded. He didn't even dare check if they were alive. No one had a moment to spare. From both ends of the canyon, nearly 100 rock ninjas advanced, their earthen armor glinting in the dim light. They fanned out, sealing every escape route and hemming Nathan and the others into a deadly trap. Nathan drew a breath and tightened his grip on his kunai. The real fight was about to begin. By sheer numbers, we still hold the advantage, but in skill, we're outclassed. The Rock Ninja Squad is clearly overprepared. Not a single Genin in their ranks, only Chunin and higher. Ours? Nearly 400 strong, and more than half of us are fresh-faced Genin. Rookies like Nathan, who just graduated weeks ago. This fight is a deadly gamble. All I can do now is hope the frontline headquarters sends reinforcements before it's too late. Nathan glanced at the two Jonin scrambling along the cliff faces to his left and right. He drew a slow, steadying breath and murmured, "Stick close to me from here on out." His words seemed to steady Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko, whose hearts were still hammering in their chests. They'd been by his side for nearly 4 months now, and Nathan refused to let them fall here. Of course, he understood his own limits. If he couldn't protect them, he wouldn't pretend otherwise. He'd been braced for that possibility ever since the team formed. But he wasn't about to give up without a fight. Nathan checked his watch as the last seconds ticked by. The field lay quiet, a tense hush settling over both armies as they readied themselves. Then, abruptly, someone in the crowd screamed, "Attack!" It was as if a switch had been flipped. The air exploded into chaos. Battle cries, the clash of steel, and bursts of elemental chakra. Boulders shattered against shields and helmets as rock-type jutsu rained down on Konoha's center, scattering the shinobi arrayed there. Nathan and his teammates had been stationed near that very center, and they were prime targets. With a rumble beneath their feet, more than 30 Iwagakure Chunin erupted from underground, seeking to split the middle of Konoha's formation in two. By widening the engagement front, they aimed to maximize the damage they could inflict. Nathan's instincts screamed at him. He felt a slight shift in the earth just to his left, one of the enemy fighters surfacing. Calmly, he drew a single kunai, coiled in the ready position. The moment the rock ninja's head broke through the dirt, Nathan sprang his throw. Ah! A harrowing scream cut through the melee as the kunai found its mark, plunging into the attacker's eye socket. The rock shinobi collapsed back into the crater he had created, and for a heartbeat, Nathan allowed himself a grim nod of satisfaction before the battle's roar swallowed him once more. Blood trickled down the rock ninja's cheek as he spun around, desperately searching for his assailant. Before he could raise his guard, a second kunai whistled through the night air and buried itself in his heart. With a final shudder, the ninja's eyes drifted shut and he slumped to the ground. On the surface, Nathan's kill looked effortless, but it was anything but. First, he had to pinpoint his target's exact location. Without that perfect read, his first throw would never find its mark. Next came the near-impossible task of immaculate aim. Only a precisely thrown kunai could pierce armor and heart in one shot, denying the enemy any chance to counterattack. Above all, he needed absolute mental discipline, blocking out every distraction. Just moments earlier, another rock ninja had locked swords with Ryosuke. Had Nathan broken his focus to aid his comrade, he would never have landed that single fatal strike. Chapter 33. Padding, Blackstone. The instant the Iwagakure shinobi's comrade, a chunin, slumped to the ground at Nathan's strike, fury lit up the ninja's eyes. With a roar, he shoved Ryosuke back and charged straight at Nathan, but Nathan didn't flinch. He planted his feet, squared his shoulders, and met the assault head-on. Their kunai met in a thunderous clash. Sparks flew as metal scraped metal, each man pouring every ounce of strength into the blades. Nathan stared unblinkingly into his opponent's rage-filled gaze. He felt nothing but cold resolve. On the battlefield, death was always a possibility. Those who killed must be ready to be killed in turn. Guilt had no place here. Ha! Nathan barked, driving his weight forward. With a single powerful sweep, he knocked the rock ninja's kunai aside. The blow rattled the man's grip and sent him stumbling backward, another adversary neutralized by Nathan's unshakable will. Nathan barely staggered back a half step before lunging in again. Clang, 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 the harsh ring of steel on steel echoed with every clash. He twirled his kunai with practiced precision, calling on every aspect of his basic physical technique. Though he lacked any advanced jutsu, he kept pace with the chunin before him. They snapped apart, each catching their breath. Across those few paces stood Ishii Ichiro, his gaze flickering with the turmoil of someone who had teetered on the edge of madness. The death of his comrade had nearly unhinged him, but now he stumbled into clarity. Reluctantly, he acknowledged the truth. This young genin was no mere novice. In close-quarters combat, Nathan posed a genuine threat. Ichiro's greater experience and adult strength had granted him the upper hand so far. Without them, he might well have come out on the losing side. As he studied Nathan's stance and grip, the chunin weighed his opponent's skill. At the same time, Nathan dissected Ichiro's style. From the swift angles of attack to the subtle shifts in weight, he'd gleaned enough during their exchange to gauge Ichiro's capabilities. Neither fighter would underestimate the other again. Though neither side had yet resorted to underhanded tactics, Nathan knew his opponent was no real threat. Still, he remained vigilant and cast a quick glance around the battlefield. Chaos reigned in the narrow canyon. Cries of clash and shuriken struck the rocky walls in rapid succession. Konoha's forces outnumbered the enemy, but even the chunin found it hard to maneuver in the tight space. The hidden stone chunin had come fully prepared and refused to engage in straightforward combat. At the first opportunity, they melted into the crowd, using the swarms of Konoha genin as moving shields. Tangled together, the Konoha chunin hesitated to unleash powerful ninjutsu or detonation tags for fear of harming their own. The elite stone ninja had no such qualms. Confident that these low-level shinobi posed little danger, they prowled freely among them, leveraging their seasoned skill to inflict steady damage. With one side handcuffed by conscience and the other fighting without scruples, the outcome was all but sealed. Nathan had no way of knowing what was happening elsewhere, but he'd already heard that several genin in the surrounding area had fallen. He was more than capable of dealing with the rock village shinobi in front of him, yet he held back. Drawing attention to himself now could only bring more trouble. After all, a lone tree that towers above the rest is the first to be struck by lightning. Exceptional talents like Nathan often become prime targets for rival villages. Slaying Heishi might be dismissed as a hit and run, but killing Ichiro Ishii in open combat would be too blatant. Nathan didn't want to be the first to stand out. He only wanted to survive until the war's end. For now, the smart move was to preserve the uneasy balance. Konoha had been taken by surprise, but they weren't completely out of the fight. They were operating close enough to their base in the Land of Rain that reinforcements could arrive at any moment. If the Hidden Rock village didn't pull back in time, the tables could turn on them. That, in fact, was the entire point of the raid, to exploit Konoha's vulnerabilities and weaken their reserve forces, not to achieve total annihilation. As long as Nathan kept his head down and played it cool, he'd have a chance to see this conflict through. Nathan figured the rock ninjas wouldn't linger here much longer. His immediate goal was simple: survive until they moved on. To buy himself that time, he couldn't let these shinobi stand idle. With determination, he lunged into action. Forming hand seals in a blur, Nathan channeled his chakra into the D-rank body flicker technique. In an instant, he vanished and reappeared before Ichiro Ishii like a gust of wind. Against weaker opponents, this jutsu might pass for true teleportation. But facing someone of Ichiro's skill, it becomes merely a lightning-fast dash, still visible to keen eyes. Ichiro's reflexes were razor-sharp. He brought his forearm up just in time to intercept Nathan's blow. The clash of their chakra forced Ichiro to halt the ninjutsu he'd been preparing, leaving him momentarily off balance, exactly the opening Nathan needed. Ichiro Ishii was confident that Nathan's close-quarters combat skills rivaled his own. His plan was simple: exploit the moments Nathan tried to back off and form a hand seal, then unleash a powerful ninjutsu. But he quickly discovered there was no exploitable opening. The instant he feigned retreat or tried to put distance between them, Nathan would surge forward, interrupting him before a single jutsu could be released. Whether through a swift punch, a well-placed kick, or a precisely thrown kunai, Nathan ensured Ichiro never got the chance to call upon his chakra. The samurai of the Iron Country have earned their reputation in the ninja world by mastering this very tactic: constant disruption. While Nathan lacked the raw speed and strength of a true samurai, his level 3 basic physical skills combined with level 3 ninja tool throwing allowed him to dominate an average Iwagakure Chunin. He moved with controlled precision, cutting off every avenue for Ichiro's jutsu. Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko provided crucial support from the flanks. Though neither could match Ichiro's power head-on, their intermittent volleys of shuriken kept him on edge, forcing him to divide his attention. With Ichiro pinned between Nathan's relentless offense and the occasional shuriken salvo, he had no choice but to face Nathan in pure hand-to-hand combat. And so the battle ground on, each minute stretching as Nathan and Ichiro exchanged blow after blow, jutsu utterly off the table. Nathan watched as the skirmish along the cliff's edge raged on, the cacophony of clashes growing louder by the second. Every few moments, tremors from the Jonin's jutsu rippled through the battlefield, sending loose stones tumbling toward everyone in the vicinity. When a cascade of rock fragments rained down, Nathan seized the opening. He pulled Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko behind him just in time, narrowly evading the debris. At the same instant, high above them, Ichiro Ishii formed a rapid series of hand seals. With a thunderous roar, he unleashed the Hidden Rock Village's signature technique, Earth Style, Earth Spear. Dozens of jagged stone spikes erupted from the ground in a lethal forest of rock. Nathan didn't hesitate. He hauled Ryosuke and Shizuko back further, keeping them just out of reach of the spear's advance. As the lethal columns of earth settled, he eased his grip on the two younger shinobi, allowing them to steady themselves. Tapping his palm, Nathan materialized 3 kunai. In one fluid motion, he let them fly. The blades hissed through the air, aiming straight for Ishii's throat, chest, and lower abdomen. Ichiro's eyes widened at the sight of the projectiles. Memories of the last time Nathan's kunai had drawn blood flickered through his mind, sharpening his reflexes. With a swift sidestep, he evaded the first kunai by inches, then twisted away from the second and third, just as they cut through the air where he had stood. Breathing heavily, Ichiro Ishii steadied himself and glared at Nathan, with respect and a trace of wariness. It was clear he would be far more cautious this time around. If Nathan hadn't possessed such striking eyes, he might have convinced himself the boy before him had awakened the Sharingan. In fact, Ichiro Ishii had already spotted the Uchiha crest on Nathan's uniform and quietly pieced together his true identity. In Ichiro's experience, only a young Uchiha blessed with an open Sharingan could send a kunai flying with such fluid precision. Still, Nathan kept his secret tightly sealed. He had never once let the slightest hint of his dojutsu slip. Chapter 34. Killing Whoosh! Whoosh! Just as Ichiro Ishii narrowly sidestepped Nathan's kunai, a volley of shurikens hissed toward him, cutting off every avenue of escape. With no choice but to defend himself, Ishii slammed his own kunai against the incoming blades. Seizing the opening, Nathan activated his instant body technique and closed the distance in the blink of an eye. Almost as quickly, they were locked in combat again, Nathan's movements smooth and precise, Ishii's strikes fueled by rising frustration. On either side, Ryusuke and Shizuko Mizutani shadowed Nathan's lead, executing his signals to disrupt Ishii's rhythm at every turn. "Damn him!" Ishii snarled, feeling more like a training dummy than a worthy adversary. In that instant, a kunai whistled in from Nathan's flank, but it wasn't aimed at Ishii. Nathan, fully absorbed in the fight, didn't see it coming. "Watch out!" Ryusuke shouted. "Careful!" Shizuko cried. A sudden chill raced down Nathan's spine. Instinctively, he sprang backward, and the kunai tore past his face, embedding itself with a metallic thunk into the wooden beam behind him. Nathan landed on his feet, heart pounding and eyes aflame with renewed determination. Nathan's eyes snapped toward the flash of metal, just in time to see a kunai sail past. Beyond it, a burly, middle-aged shinobi from Iwagakure charged straight at him, with a Konoha Chunin close on his heels. That Chunin had been the one to sound the alarm. Nathan recognized him as the same officer who'd marshaled their defenses moments ago, dashing from threat to keep everyone safe. Now the tables had turned. He was on the offensive. A flicker of irritation passed across Nathan's face. If that rock ninja hadn't struck first, he could still be sparring with Ichiro Ishii, refining his techniques in a controlled exercise. Instead, he'd been forced into open combat, exactly what the enemy wanted. But Nathan wasn't about to sit back and be pinned down. He assessed the situation in a heartbeat. Stay passive, and he'd be surrounded in seconds. His only real choice was to seize the initiative, let them see a fraction of his power, and make them think twice before pressing the attack. In one swift motion, Nathan drew 6 shurikens from his belt. He whirled, hurling them in a tight volley at the approaching rock ninja. The blades cut through the air, each one aimed to disrupt the charge and buy Nathan the precious seconds he needed to dictate the battle's next move. Nathan launched 8 shuriken in a single, precise volley. 3 to seal off his opponent's escape, 3 to anticipate any shift in position, and the final 2 aimed squarely at the ninja's chest and abdomen. Caught off guard by Nathan's swift, decisive counterattack, the middle-aged Iwa shinobi, Ichiro, reacted with uncharacteristic stiffness, just long enough for a Konoha Chunin to close in from behind, their blades clashing with sharp ring after ring. But every advantage carries a price. In keeping Ichiro at bay, Nathan inadvertently granted him the breathing room he desperately needed. As Nathan's last shuriken flew true, Ichiro simultaneously hurled a kunai. Nathan had no moment to raise his guard. He could only twist aside, letting the blade whistle past in a near miss. Seizing the opening, Ichiro drew deep on his chakra, his fingers weaving seals at blinding speed. With a forceful slap to the ground, he unleashed Earth Release, Earth-splitting palm. Instantly, the earth cracked in a wide, jagged fan centered on his palm, the fissures racing toward Nathan's feet. In the span of a heartbeat, the very ground beneath him became a trap. Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko both lunged forward to help, but their lack of battlefield experience showed. Every kunai and shuriken they hurled fell short or was easily deflected. In the meantime, Ichiro had already completed his hand seals. The earth beneath Nathan's feet trembled violently as long fissures raced toward him. Nathan's expression hardened. He thrust his hands together, and faster than he ever had before, formed the final seals for the instant body technique. In the blink of an eye, his form blurred, and then disappeared, just before the ground split open where he had stood. He reappeared a good distance away, narrowly outside the ninjutsu's devastating range. Such an earthquake-style technique was a nightmare for any shinobi without flight, a fact Nathan fully appreciated. Had Ichiro not exhausted his chakra elsewhere, or if he'd refined this jutsu even further, Nathan might never have regained his footing, let alone escaped intact. Shaking off the dust, Nathan allowed himself a moment's relief as he spotted Ichiro standing frozen in shock. He surged forward, but at that instant, 3 kunai screamed toward him, thrown with deadly precision by the very opponent he just evaded. Ichiro Ishii's eyes flicked to the talisman stuck to the back of one kunai. Recognizing the explosive seal, he leapt backward just in time. Boom! A towering column of flame burst skyward as the detonating talisman erupted. The shockwave rolled across the battlefield, whipping up dust and debris and plunging everyone into stunned silence. Nathan didn't hesitate. Shielded by the fiery haze, he pressed forward toward Ishii, intent on closing the gap. Then, just as he was about to engage in hand-to-hand combat, he froze. His fingers danced through the air, tracing the 6 hand seals, Zi, Yin, Shu, Cho, Mao, Yin, in a seamless flow. He drew in a deep breath, concentrated his fire nature chakra in his throat, and expelled it in a scorching jet of flame. In an instant, a volley of fireballs, each one like a blooming ember, rocketed toward Ishii. It was a breathtaking display of Uchiha power, but Ichiro Ishii had no intention of standing by to admire it. When Ichiro Ishii saw Nathan's hand seal, a cold dread ran down his spine. His ominous premonition had come true, and there was nothing he could do but dodge. Flames roared to life in swift succession. Ichiro tumbled left, rolled right, narrowly avoiding the worst of the blast, but not without consequence. When the fire finally died away, he discovered his clothes scorched in multiple places and painful blisters marking his face. Nathan's fire style, Phoenix Fire technique, wasn't a high-level jutsu. The flames were only of average intensity, and Nathan hadn't even activated his Sharingan to sharpen their focus. That's why Ichiro escaped with burns rather than being badly wounded, or killed outright, which would have been the case had Nathan unleashed that flawless opportunity at full strength. Ichiro barely had time to catch his breath before Nathan's hands began weaving seals again. Panic seized him, and he tried to summon a teleportation ninjutsu to flee. But before he could complete a single hand sign, a brutal psychic force slammed into his mind, disorienting, overwhelming. And in that fractured moment of vision, he saw Nathan, eyes blazing, hurling a kunai straight at him. Paralyzed by the mental assault, Ichiro could only watch the blade slice through the air toward his chest. Ichiro Ishii barely had time to react before instinct drove him to the side. Then, a searing pain exploded in his chest. He looked down and saw a kunai buried up to the hilt in his heart. In his last moments, he forced his head up and stared at Nathan. He noted with horror that Nathan's arm was still at his side, unmoved. An illusion? He whispered. Yes, Nathan had indeed cast an illusion, but not the formidable genjutsu known as Magic Jail Hang, which requires the Sharingan's power. He hadn't activated his Sharingan this time, so that technique was off the table. Instead, he'd relied on a minor skill called the Reflection Heart technique. Though its primary purpose is to aid the Sharingan's evolution, it carries a subtle, illusory effect. It distorts an opponent's senses just enough to compromise their judgment. In those critical seconds, Ichiro had seen a phantom of the kunai being thrown and instinctively dodged, only to be struck by the real blade the moment he committed to the feint. In the end, Nathan's strike was fatal. Ichiro Ishii didn't even have a chance to defend himself. The reason was simple. Nathan's mastery of this illusion technique was extraordinary. At skill level 3, he was already on the cusp of level 4, and this ability was the most polished in his repertoire. Although its power didn't quite rival an A-rank illusion, it easily surpassed the typical C-rank standard, so it was only natural that Ichiro fell for it. After all, who would expect a lowly genin to command such a breadth of skills? Chapter 35. Retreat. A kunai tore through the air behind him. Nathan, as if he had eyes in the back of his head, leaned aside and let the blade whistle past. He spun around just in time to see an Iwagakure Chunin break off from his two struggling Konoha genin and charge straight at him. Beside him, another Iwagakure shinobi did the same, abandoning his own opponent to join the attack. They intended to trap him with a pincer maneuver. Nathan had anticipated this. When the middle-aged Iwagakure ninja had first assessed him, it became clear that he'd painted a target on his own back. Avoiding their attention was no longer an option, so he chose to seize the initiative. His goal: eliminate Ichiro Ishii as swiftly as possible and shatter their rhythm. With Ishii down, both of these attackers would have no choice but to turn their full strength on him. And that was exactly what was unfolding now. Nathan felt as if he'd become a living shield for the Leaf Genin, but on closer thought, his personal risk hadn't risen. If anything, it had actually fallen. Under the enemy's usual tactics, once those two rock ninjas finished off their current targets, they would have turned on him alongside Ishii Ichiro. With Ichiro now dead, there were only two opponents left instead of three, and the immediate danger had dropped significantly. Moreover, whether the surviving Leaf Genin liked it or not, they were drawing the notice of other rock ninjas nearby. That meant fewer enemies could turn their focus on him. As long as he kept control of the pace, he wouldn't be overwhelmed by fresh attackers. All of this flickered through Nathan's mind in an instant. Without hesitating, he drew a kunai in each hand and surged forward at the two rock ninjas standing before him. They wasted no words. Exchanging a quick glance, they both sprinted to meet him, eager to engage in close-quarters combat. Ninjas who aren't prodigies always guard their chakra. They know it's finite, and on a chaotic battlefield, you never know when you'll run out and leave yourself open to a hidden enemy's strike. That's why most rely on careful tactics rather than flashy ninjutsu. Nathan had proven himself a formidable close-quarters fighter against Ichiro Ishii, but that had been a one-on-one duel. Now he faced two rock ninja working in concert, and they did not balk when he charged in for hand-to-hand combat. In fact, they exchanged relieved glances. They still remembered how Nathan had dispatched Ichiro with a sudden ninjutsu barrage. So close combat played right into their strategy. Secretly, they'd hoped he'd choose just that, and they were confident he couldn't handle both of them at once. And sure enough, Nathan was about to learn just how right they were. Despite having perfected the basic physical technique to level 3, mastered every skill, and even gained some real combat experience under Ichiro Ishii, Nathan still couldn't handle two opponents at once. In no time, fresh scars had appeared across his arms and torso, thankfully all superficial, and none serious enough to slow him down for now. A sharp clang rang out as Nathan's kunai collided with stone-hard fists. He parried one blow, spun and deflected the other, then dropped back a step to reopen some distance. The two rock ninjas didn't rush him, though. Instead, they moved into position on his left and right, closing in deliberately. As they advanced, they taunted him to shake his confidence. "Kid, you don't stand a chance," one growled. "Drop your weapon and surrender. Maybe we'll spare your life." "Yeah, boy," the other added, voice dripping with mock concern. "Look around. Do you see anyone coming to help you? Give it up now, and you'll avoid the real pain." Nathan's grip tightened on the kunai's handle. He glanced at the wider battlefield out of the corner of his eye, weighing his only options. Everyone around him was already locked in combat. No one could spare a moment to help, not even Ryosuke or Mizutani Shizuko. They were busy battling a young rock ninja, backed up by a Konoha genin. Outnumbered 3-1, the odds looked grim, but no one was in immediate danger. Nathan let out a quiet sigh of relief. He shifted his focus back to the two adversaries before him. Without unleashing his Sharingan, challenging these melee specialists one-on-two would be suicide. At the same time, he had no reason to believe they intended to kill him outright. That mutual hesitation had created a perfect stalemate, exactly what Nathan needed. He saw no reason to risk a fatal confrontation when time was on his side. Reinforcements were sure to arrive, and with them, the conflict would resolve itself. Reassured by this plan, Nathan steadied his breathing and readied himself. Frustrated by his calm indifference, the two rock ninjas finally dropped their taunts. With a fierce battle cry, they charged, and Nathan braced for their onslaught. Nathan's heightened senses were on full alert as the clang of metal rang out again and again. Despite being outnumbered, he held his own in the one-on-two skirmish, parrying and countering for what felt like a minute or two. Then, unexpectedly, one of the rock ninjas gave a quick hand sign and dropped back, clearly preparing a ninjutsu. Nathan's heart skipped a beat. He'd assumed they'd keep up a straightforward assault long enough for him to stall them, but their abrupt shift in tactics caught him off guard. He pivoted to create distance, but as he stepped back, the remaining rock ninja surged forward, driving him against the jagged rocks behind him. A cold knot of urgency tightened in Nathan's chest. He considered activating his Sharingan. With a single, well-aimed strike, he was confident he could finish off the ninja before him, but doing so risked revealing his special ability to the hidden attacker. He swallowed, weighing his options. Time was running out, and the next move could decide the outcome of this deadly duel. Nathan's heart pounded. If anyone discovered he'd awakened the Sharingan, reinforcements from the hidden stone village would swarm this battlefield in an instant. Every Uchiha who opened that eye became a high-value prize, and slaying one to claim the treasure of its dojutsu would bring any village untold prestige. With no cage or guardian to protect his power, stone ninjas wouldn't hesitate to abduct him for research. He told himself he could simply avoid activating the Sharingan, but standing here, feeling the very air tighten around him, Nathan hated the thought of surrendering control. Just as doubt threatened to overwhelm him, a series of sharp whistles pierced the din of battle. The stone ninja lunging at Nathan froze mid-strike, his face paling. He shot a warning glance at his partner, falling back behind him. In perfect unison, they formed hand seals and unleashed an earth release escape technique, vanishing in a whirl of dust to the battlefield's edge. "Are they retreating?" Nathan whispered, relief flooding his veins. If they truly pulled back, at least for now, he could breathe and plan his next move. Chapter 36, Reinforcements and the End. "They're trying to flee. Stop them! Don't let anyone escape!" Shouts erupted across the battered plain. Nathan didn't need to be told twice that the hidden rock shinobi were making a hasty retreat. He'd already done his part in this engagement, and the front lines were finally stabilizing. Reinforcements from Konoha must be either here already or closing in fast. He had no desire to chase after deserters and risk undoing all they'd fought for. Just as he turned away, a massive silhouette appeared atop a distant cliff. A colossus of a serpent coiled there, its scales banded in bruised purples, its twin horns glinting in the fading light. Predator's eyes narrowed, radiating a silent, terrible promise of violence. 10,000 snake, Nathan breathed under his breath. It was the fabled summon from Ryuchi Cave, a creature whose poison alone could fell an army. How had Nathan recognized it so swiftly? Simple. Perched between the serpent's horns was the unmistakable figure of Orochimaru. Pale skin, slitted golden pupils rimmed in lavender shadow, and that serpentine grin confirmed it. The snake Sannin himself had joined the fray. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The battlefield's roar dimmed as Nathan absorbed the implications. With Orochimaru back in play, the balance of power would tip catastrophically in favor of the enemy, unless Konoha's reinforcements arrived without delay. He squared his shoulders and strode forward, steeling himself for what came next. Reinforcements or not, this war would not end until he faced the mad Sannin and quelled the threat he posed, once and for all. Nathan's breath caught at the sight of the gargantuan serpent coiling onto the field. That unmistakable silhouette could only belong to Manda, the legendary snake summon. If nothing else, this had to be the vanguard of reinforcements. Even more shocking, atop Manda rode Orochimaru in person. As the appointed commander-in-chief of Konoha's forces on the Rain Country front, it was almost unheard of for him to abandon the base so recklessly. Yet Nathan couldn't help but feel reassured. Orochimaru was one of the 3 legendary shinobi. His power rivaled any Kage. Who, then, could hope to stand against him? Besides, they weren't far from Konoha's forward camp. Even if an ambush waited in the shadows, Orochimaru need only buy a little time. Fresh troops wouldn't be long behind him. In that context, leaving the fortifications for a short sortie seemed no great risk. With Manda's unparalleled speed, they could close on the enemy in moments, overturn the battle with sheer force, and shield the main army from further losses. Nathan allowed himself a small, confident smile. The tide of war was about to turn. Nathan seized the opportunity. Why not accomplish 2 goals at once? His prediction proved spot on. The moment Orochimaru appeared on the battlefield, the atmosphere shifted. With a handful of precise ninjutsu, Orochimaru effortlessly incapacitated over a dozen Iwagakure Jonin. Add in the Konoha Jonin, who'd already restrained several more, and nearly half of the enemy's frontline leaders were suddenly out of commission. Dozens of Iwagakure Chunin fell under similar fates. No one had anticipated Orochimaru's personal intervention. It completely upended Iwagakure's carefully laid plans. If they'd truly been prepared for a showdown, they wouldn't have broken ranks so quickly. Yet that piercing whistle cut through the chaos, a clear signal for an emergency withdrawal. The Iwagakure Chunin, who had been dueling Nathan moments before, went pale, discarded his stance, and fled without a second glance. That's the power of a top-tier shinobi. One appearance, one command, and an entire force can crumble like a house of cards. In an instant, those fearsome warriors were reduced to scattered fugitives. Nathan watched as the enemy retreated, their pride shattered, and knew this victory would resonate long after the dust settled. Nathan didn't believe in kicking someone when they were already down. Once he'd confer that the area was clear, he withdrew the ointment and bandages for external wounds from his ninja pouch and set to work treating his own injuries. The previous skirmish hadn't left him with anything life-threatening, but his skin was badly abraded. If he didn't tend to the cuts promptly, infection could turn minor scrapes into serious problems. A pair of footsteps sounded behind him. He glanced up to see Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko approaching, both of them bearing fresh wounds and wearing the same pale, shaken expressions. Their colorlessness wasn't from blood loss, it was the sheer horror of the battlefield that had drained them. All around, limbs lay broken, pools of blood glistened under the sun, and the occasional groan of agony pierced the air. Simply remaining upright felt like an achievement. Nathan's gaze swept over the survivors. Roughly 200 Konoha shinobi remained, about 2/3 of their original strength. That might sound like a lot, but this toll had been exacted in just over 10 minutes of unrelenting combat. Nathan wasn't surprised to learn that the Iwagakure shinobi had singled out the lower-ranked fighters. Of the more than 200 survivors, the vast majority were Chunin, while the death toll among Genin exceeded 50%, and over half of those were fresh graduates. Imagine seeing familiar faces strewn across the battlefield, classmates you'd trained alongside, now lifeless. For Nathan, it stung less. He hadn't been close to most of them. But Ryosuke and Shizuko Mizutani were feeling the weight of every loss. Ryosuke, the class social butterfly, had friends among almost every squad. Shizuko, ever observant, remembered each name and every face. Their grief was palpable. As they cleaned their weapons by the campfire that evening, Ryosuke broke the silence. "Nathan, do you ever think we're just delaying the inevitable, that one day we'll die out there?" Nathan opened his mouth, ready to reassure him, but the words froze on his tongue. "No," he finally whispered, but even to his own ears, it sounded hollow. The Third Shinobi War was proving as merciless as any before it. So far, at least in this phase, the overall casualties hadn't reached the levels seen in the past. Yet with Konoha's defenses stretched ever thinner, with each skirmish pushing them closer to their own gates, a true tragedy loomed on the horizon, one that even hope might not withstand. Nathan glanced across the battlefield, where casualties lay thick among even the highest-ranking shinobi. He couldn't be certain he'd make it through alive. How, then, could he promise Liangji that he wouldn't die? After a long, heavy silence, he forced out, "Don't dwell on it. Just do your best to stay alive." "Do my best to stay alive," Liangji echoed softly, falling quiet once more. Minutes crawled by before the second wave of reinforcements thundered onto the field. This time, alongside fresh combat units, a large contingent of medical ninjas advanced under escort. As the very first village to institute a comprehensive medical ninja training program, Konoha boasted far more healers than any other major settlement. Their presence made all the difference. Under the protection of frontline fighters, these medics wove through wounded shinobi, channeling healing chakra. Minor cuts and bruises vanished almost instantly, while even critically injured comrades were stabilized, their lives hanging on until more thorough treatment could begin. Nathan watched as the wounds on his skin closed up almost before his eyes. He'd made up his mind. No matter what, he would learn medical ninjutsu. They were simply too valuable. With enough chakra, even serious cuts or sudden illnesses could be healed in moments. He knew the battlefield would leave him worse off before long, so he'd better be ready. Someday, he hoped to strengthen his body so much that it could heal itself, rendering medical jutsu unnecessary. But that was a distant goal. Right now, on this dangerous front, mastering one or two emergency healing techniques was a must. The medic, ninja, withdrew his hand from Nathan's shoulder. Keep this area dry and avoid any strenuous exercise for the next few days. In about 72 hours, you'll be back at full strength. Thank you, Nathan said earnestly. The medic nodded and hurried on to tend the next injured shinobi. Chapter 37. 1 month later, swish. A dark shape materialized out of the shadows just beyond the smoke of the training grounds. Nathan's heart leapt. Ryosuke and Shizuko rose to their feet as well, eyes wide with relief and respect. "Sensei Furukawa," they exclaimed in unison. Furukawa, now a fully recognized jonin, strode forward, his dark cloak flickering around him. He'd been away on a high-priority mission for nearly a month, leaving his 3 genin to hone their skills under the village's standard instructors. Today's clash with a handful of Iwagakure Chunin had proven tougher than any of them expected. "Sensei, is the fight over?" Nathan asked, glancing past Furukawa at the muffled grunts and thuds drifting in from the other side of the barricades. Furukawa's stern features softened just a fraction. He nodded once. "Yeah, they've pulled back." Ryosuke slumped in his seat before snapping upright again. Shizuko ran a hand through her damp hair, eyes scanning the perimeter for any sign of a surprise attack. Nathan felt the weight of their battered arms and aching muscles, but also a surge of pride. They'd survived. Furukawa surveyed the 3 of them, his gaze firm but not unkind. "You're all still alive. That's more than I could have hoped for." He offered a rare, approving nod. Nathan exchanged a glance with his teammates. Praise from their jonin was supposed to feel good, but Furukawa wasn't one to dote on his students. He knew it, and so did they. The relief in Ryosuke's shoulders and the flush of triumph on Shizuko's face made it clear they'd counted on something more, even if they wouldn't admit it. "Sensei?" Shizuko ventured, her voice not quite hiding the note of doubt. "That's it?" Furukawa's gaze sharpened. "You join the academy to become ninjas, not pampered children. Pain, fear, uncertainty, those are the tools I give you. If you can't handle them, you don't deserve the title." Silence fell. Every one of them knew their teacher preached survival of the fittest above all else, but it always stung when he reminded them. Nathan recalled the grueling sparring sessions, the nights spent shivering in the cold, practicing stealth drills until dawn. He doubted himself more than once, but he'd also learned what it meant to push through. "Well," Nathan said, stepping forward, voice steady. "Thank you, Sensei. We'll be ready next time." Furukawa's stern expression cracked into something almost like a smile. "I expect nothing less. Now, get cleaned up. We leave at dawn for the next assignment." As Furukawa turned and strode away, Nathan felt a fierce determination settle in his chest. This was the path he'd chosen. Harsh, demanding, but real, and he'd prove himself worthy, no matter how high his teacher's standards. Furukawa glanced at his team and broke the silence. "Pack up," he ordered. "We'll move out in 30 minutes. If we're lucky, we'll reach the base camp before dark, and finally get some rest." With that, he hurried off. "All right, let's get our gear together," Nathan said, rising to his feet. He began rifling through the scattered supplies around him. Because this mission had dragged on longer than expected, he'd loaded extra clothes, rations, and spare equipment before setting out, and then discarded the bulk of it mid-battle to stay agile. Now that their side had won, the fallen items lay undisturbed across the clearing, waiting to be reclaimed. Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko, startled back to reality by Nathan's example, exchanged a quick nod and started gathering their own packs. Shizuko brushed twigs from her hair, while Ryosuke reattached the last of his tools to his belt. As the sun dipped lower, the team bundled sleeping mats, emergency supplies, and mission equipment back into neat, manageable loads. 30 minutes later, the convoy rumbled to life. Wagons wheeled into position, horses stamped, and the group filed out of the battlefield. Only a handful of soldiers remained behind to secure the area and tend to the wounded. Night had fallen by the time Nathan reached Konoha's base, camp in the Land of Rain. He slipped into his tent, the thick forest pressing in on all sides. There, on a worn blanket, he sat cross-legged and closed his eyes. The gentle drip of rain from the tents overhead became his only rhythm as he began to refine his chakra, each breath steady, each pulse of energy drawing him deeper into focused meditation. Tomorrow, he knew, would bring new challenges. But for now, in the hush of the rain country night, Nathan found a moment of peace. Furukawa summed up their immediate priority clearly. Over the next stretch, they needed only to acclimate to the battlefield conditions and stabilize their mindset. No major missions would be assigned during this phase, an opportunity that Nathan couldn't afford to waste. He had to use this downtime to raise his own combat abilities to a new level. Reflecting on today's skirmish, Nathan realized that, without resorting to his Sharingan, his power barely outstripped that of an average Chunin. In a one-on-one duel, he fared well, but if two or more enemies attacked simultaneously, he'd be in real trouble. Even a single opponent fighting without restraint could still knock him off balance, or worse, wound him. He knew that activating the Sharingan would boost his strength to above most Chunin, but on a full-scale battlefield, Chunin were still the lowliest frontline fighters. Real survivability belonged to the Jonin. And try as he might, even at his absolute peak, Nathan wasn't remotely close to Jonin caliber. Not even against a second-rate special Jonin, provided they weren't purely support, would he stand a chance. This period of preparation would be crucial. If he wanted to survive, and eventually thrive, Nathan had to narrow the gap between Chunin and Jonin, mastering every technique and honing every skill at his disposal. Nathan knew that unless he could evolve his Sharingan to 2 Tomoe, he stood little chance against the enemy's next onslaught. But that upgrade would take months of intense training, time he simply didn't have. The enemy wasn't going to pause and wait for his eyes to mature. He decided instead to divert a portion of his chakra into enhancing several fire-release escape techniques and strengthening his genjutsu. By sharpening these tools first, he could boost his overall combat effectiveness in a matter of weeks rather than months. A faster payoff meant a greater chance of survival, and with survival secured, he could return to cultivating his Sharingan without fearing for his life. After all, a perfected eye was useless if he was already dead. 1 month later, beyond the outer edge of the enemy's base camp, 4 figures moved steadily through the underbrush. The tallest, their team leader Furukawa, led the way. Nathan followed close behind, glancing left and right for movement. Ryosuke and Mizutani Shizuko brought up the rear, their eyes sharp for telltale tripwires or camouflaged pits. Every few dozen feet they halted, scanning the forest floor for clay shavings, snapped twigs, or the glint of hidden wire. This was Team 17, Furukawa, Nathan, Ryosuke, and Mizutani Shizuko, each committed to moving silently, striking swiftly, and above all, staying alive. Nathan and his squad have been on patrol duty, guarding the base camp, for the past month. What began as a routine assignment, 10 days, even 2 weeks without a single enemy sighting, has steadily grown more perilous as their sector has risen in strategic importance. At first, the patrols were almost monotonous. They'd fan out across familiar ground, find nothing, and return to camp with only the sun on their shoulders. Now, however, the terrain has shifted and the stakes have climbed accordingly. Every few days, they come upon fresh signs of enemy infiltration, discarded rations, broken branches, footprints leading into the trees. Most times, by the time they arrive, the intruders have melted away like ghosts, leaving only the echo of their passage. But occasionally, the invaders don't slip away in time. Those encounters erupt into desperate skirmishes, as flashing in the underbrush, bullets chipping bark, and every squad member fighting for his life. These aren't green recruits making a careless raid. They're trained infiltrators who know how to strike hard and vanish just as fast. Without Hiroshi, their squad leader, an actual shinobi whose stealth and combat prowess are the stuff of legend, the 17th unit would surely have suffered casualties by now. He covers their flanks, reads the terrain like an open scroll, and brings down enemies before they even realize he's there. Thanks to his guidance, the squad has survived every ambush. And as brutal as these patrols can be, Nathan admits that there's no better place to hone a soldier's instincts. This unforgiving frontier may be dangerous, but for now, it's exactly where he belongs. Since this month's operations, Nathan, Ryosuke, and Mizutani Shizuko had shed any trace of novice enthusiasm. Their teamwork was now all precision and discipline. Without a word from Commander Guchuan, each simply fell into his or her role. Nathan took point on watch, while Ryosuke and Shizuko methodically swept the surrounding ground for traps and tracks. A few quiet minutes later, Ryosuke and Shizuko returned to the group. "Sir, everything's clear," they reported in unison. Guchuan gave a curt nod. "Excellent. Let's move to the final checkpoint." "Yes, sir," the three replied. They slipped forward in near silence, boots muffled against the earth, every eye scanning for movement. Luck stayed with them. At the last waypoint, they found no sign of the enemy. Relief slipped into their shoulders and backs as they exhaled almost without realizing it. After a brief wait, the relief patrol arrived. Once Nathan and the others had handed off their posts, they turned and made their way back to the field station. Late that night, Nathan sat in the makeshift training chamber and drew in a steady breath. Once more, he launched into the reflection heart technique. When he opened his eyes, a spark of realization flickered in his gaze. "Level 4, he whispered. He flexed his fingers and formed the necessary hand seals again, activating the technique. This time, the seals bloomed in an instant, faster than ever before. Nathan felt a surge of specialized chakra flood his mind, nourishing his eyes. As the energy dissipated, he closed his eyes, concentrated, and struck the seals once more. Seal after seal, technique after technique, Nathan repeated the process 5 full times. With each cycle, he sensed his Sharingan evolving, the latent power in his irises rising to meet his intent. When he finally released the seals and opened his eyes, he felt it. His Sharingan had advanced from a single Magatama to a double Magatama. A quiet smile curved his lips. Nathan was one step closer to mastering his true potential. Chapter 38, Harvest Panel. With a single thought, Nathan summoned his proficiency interface. The pale blue screen shimmered into view, displaying his current stats. Name: Uchiha Nathan, age 11, physique 7, spirit 9, chakra 1150, 4074, 5026. Bloodline: Sharingan, single Magatama 69 1000, 112,000. Skills: Chakra Refining Technique, level 3, 454 1000, 664 1000. Fire Style, Great Fireball Technique. Level 2, 5200, 11500. Fire Style, House of Immortals. Fire Technique, Level 2, 5200, 7500. Fire Style, Dragon Fire. Technique, Level 2, 100 to 500. Magic Style, Illusion, Jail Hanging. Technique, Level 1, 100 to 105, 200. Instant Body Technique, Level 2, 15500, 234, 500. Shadow Clone Technique, Level 0, 5100. Reflection of the Heart Technique, Level 4, 875, 1000, 6, 2000. Ninja Tool Throwing, Level 3, 61,000, 210, 1000. Chakra Control, Level 3, 102, 1000, 131,000. 3 Body Technique, Level 3, 00. Basic Physical Technique, Level 3, 00. Nathan skimmed past the basic attributes and zeroed in on the bloodline entry. Just as he'd hoped, his Sharingan proficiency had risen. But what really caught his eye was the reflection of the heart technique, now at level 4, with 6 experience points toward the next rank. A small smile tugged at his lips. This harvest of progress, earned through relentless training and countless chakra refinements, was only the beginning. With every stat bump and skill upgrade, Nathan edged closer to mastering his clan's legacy and surpassing every expectation placed upon him. Nathan watched as his Sharingan's proficiency rating ticked upward. Just 5 points in the upgraded Reflection Heart technique had boosted it significantly, twice the gain he'd seen at level 3. He let out a long breath, relieved but unsurprised. As he'd predicted, Improving the reflection heart technique not only sharpened his control, but also accelerated the Sharingan's evolution. From now on, he'd need far less chakra for each milestone. In the past, 10 proficiency points had cost him a hefty 1,700 chakra. Now the same progress consumed only 850. It still didn't match the trivial 300 points he could earn by casually activating the Sharingan, but it was worlds better than before. Even if he couldn't flaunt the Sharingan at will, its growth rate would no longer be a concern. The only drawback was that his chakra ceiling, 5,026, had stalled a week ago during his last run of the chakra refining technique. Nathan knew from experience that this meant he'd tapped out his innate potential. Still, with the reflection heart technique's newfound efficiency, he was more than ready for whatever came next. Since his basic attributes couldn't be raised any further for now, they would only improve slowly over time. That dashed Nathan's plan to recklessly burn chakra with the reflection heart technique in hopes of forcing his Sharingan to evolve faster. Still, he wasn't too disappointed. Even if there were no upper limit, he couldn't afford to waste chakra. With his current level of chakra refining technique and his own aptitude, he could only generate about 3,500 chakra points each day, even on a full stomach. In other words, there simply wasn't any surplus to squander, and he needed to keep enough in reserve for emergencies. Shaking off those thoughts, Nathan turned back to the rest of his skill list. Thanks to the relaxed atmosphere during the first half of his month at the camp, he'd spent nearly every free moment and every last drop of chakra drilling his techniques. Now, with his daily supply firmly accounted for, he could finally see what new skills awaited his attention. After expending over 46,000 chakra, Nathan finally upgraded all three of his fire techniques, Great Fireball, Phoenix Fire, and Dragon Fire, to level 2. Not only did each jutsu now unfold more swiftly, but its output could also be dialed up or down across a wider spectrum. With that milestone reached, he'd effectively boosted his frontline combat power. Over the following 2 weeks, however, the missions grew more demanding. Nathan's daily training window shrank, and his chakra reserves were strained. As a result, his magic jag hang technique remained stuck halfway through level 1, far short of the level 2 mark he'd hoped to hit. He could have thrown every remaining drop of chakra into it and succeeded, but other priorities beckoned. First among them was the continued evolution of his Sharingan. Most of his chakra concentrated on refining the reflection heart technique, pushing his ocular power toward its next breakthrough. At the same time, he devoted significant energy to advancing his flash body technique from 15,500 to 234,500 toward level 2. Between those two efforts, there simply wasn't enough left to progress the magic jag hang or to touch the magic shackle technique this round. Still, Nathan reminded himself, those can wait. His fire ninjutsu are stronger than ever, and his Sharingan is growing in leaps and bounds. The rest will follow in time. At this point, Nathan had no intention of revealing his Sharingan. Since this technique only reaches its full power when paired with the Sharingan, its upgrade level wasn't his primary concern. For a surprise attack, level 1 would suffice. Still, whenever he had extra chakra to spare, he wouldn't hesitate to invest in it. Higher levels meant stronger effects and fewer openings for his enemies to exploit. In the long run, the Sharingan would remain the core of his combat prowess, so he couldn't afford to neglect the skills that complemented it. Any chakra spent here would be well worth it. Silently nodding to himself, Nathan turned his attention to his ninja tool throwing and chakra control abilities. Both had plateaued at level 3 for a while, but ever since he awakened the Sharingan, their proficiency bars had started inching upward again. Ninja tool throwing, in particular, was advancing rapidly under the Sharingan's influence. Practicing in a secluded corner whenever he could, he watched his mastery climb from 61,000 to 210,000, nearly 1/5 of the way to the next threshold. In terms of raw talent with thrown weapons, Nathan already ranks among the best. His kunai and shuriken launches carry enough force and precision to seriously threaten any ninja of equal standing. That said, actually killing a foe with tools alone remains little more than wishful thinking, at least until he raises his ninja tool throwing skill to level 4 and adds the Sharingan's precision. Even then, success would be nothing more than a long shot. Most opponents of Nathan's caliber boast unique jutsu or defenses that simply can't be pierced by blades and darts alone. Nathan sighed and flipped to the newly unlocked Shadow Clone technique in his skills menu. Proficiency, level 0, 5 100s. He'd tried it only a few times before giving up, mainly because the chakra cost was brutal. Even if he dispelled a clone the instant it formed, that clone's share of chakra, fully 10% of his total, was gone for good. In practical terms, it meant sacrificing a sizable chunk of energy just to test the technique, with no real benefit unless he could keep and use the clone. He closed the menu and exhaled. Shadow Clone had to be mastered, no question, but at this rate, it would take countless hours and chakra reserves before he could even summon one without crippling himself. Until then, Nathan knew he'd have to rely on his superior tool work and wait for the day when he could safely bear the cost of multiplying himself. Nathan stood back and ran the numbers in his head. With a total reserve of 5,000 chakra points, splitting off a single shadow clone would divide his energy evenly, 2,500 for him and 2,500 for the clone. But the moment he dispelled the clone, he'd lose 10% of its chakra as a penalty. That's 250 points gone in an instant. If he ramped up to 4 clones, each would carry just 1,000 points. Dispelling them all at once would cost him 400 points per clone, 4 losses of 100 points apiece, or 400 points total. The more clones he made, the more chakra he'd burn every time he canceled the technique. Even if he practiced the bare minimum, summoning and immediately dispelling a single clone just to hone his skill, he'd sacrifice 250 chakra points with each attempt. There was no way Nathan was willing to bleed that much chakra just to train. After a few trial runs, he decided to shelve the idea until his reserves were substantially higher. He had plenty of time, but not enough chakra. There was no point in rushing his mastery of the Shadow Clone technique. Nathan reviewed the past month's achievements one last time, then closed the interface and settled into meditation to refine his chakra. 2 hours later, his reserves had fully replenished to about 2,000 points. He opened his eyes, stretched out every muscle, and eased back to rest. With new tasks waiting on tomorrow's schedule, he knew he needed a full night's sleep to be at his best. Chapter 39, Night Raid, Part 1. A flash of light tore through the darkness. Boom! An explosion boomed in the distance, yanking Nathan from his sleep. His groggy eyes sharpened in an instant. Without a second thought, he grabbed his ninja tool pouch and forehead protector, swung his legs over the edge of his cot, and launched himself upright. Moments later, Nathan stepped out of the tent fully armed. A handful of shinobi were already gathering, including their squad leader, Furukawa. Nathan closed the few paces between them and fell in beside him. Together, they peered into the inky night, where the faint echoes of clashing steel and shouts of grunts carried on the wind. Something was definitely wrong. In their sector, 2 detachments shared patrol duties, one by day, the other by night. Team 17, Nathan's unit, handled daytime watches. The newly arrived 2nd detachment held the night shift. No doubt that tonight's explosion signaled a clash between that midnight team and an unseen enemy. That nocturnal force was organized into 4 squads. 2 of them mirrored Team 17's setup, each led by a jonin with 3 genin under command. Surely, it was those squads now locked in combat somewhere beyond the tree line. Nathan and Furukawa exchanged a glance. The night raid had begun. Nathan studied the battlefield layout one last time. The remaining 2 squads under Team 2 each consisted of 1 special jonin and 3 chunin. Counting the 3 jonin-level commanders alongside them, Team 2 numbered 17 shinobi in all, 3 jonin, 2 special jonin, 6 chunin, and 6 genin, virtually identical in strength to Team 1. He could only hope the enemy would slip up and reveal their position to one of those squads. If that happened, Team 2 could ambush them, triggering a skirmish on favorable terms. Otherwise, Nathan knew they faced a force every bit as powerful as their own. The mission would shift in an instant from reconnaissance and infiltration to all-out surprise assault, and a fight to the death with no quarter given. As he weighed his options, Nathan heard Team 1's call to assemble. At the same time, distant clashes echoed through the treetops in two other directions. That sound left no room for doubt. This was not a stealth operation. No true infiltration force would divide itself so openly, exposing multiple units at once. They were under attack. Taking a steadying breath, Nathan readied himself for the battle he had hoped to avoid, and prayed his gamble hadn't already cost them the advantage. Nathan surveyed their surroundings with a frown. It was obvious their position had been compromised. No one accidentally leaves a trail that obvious unless they want to be found. A surprise attack was looming. Zhen, however, couldn't make sense of it. "What's the point?" she muttered. "This is just a temporary outpost. There aren't even any strategic installations here. If the enemy captured it, what real advantage would they gain? And it's not far from Konoha's main base. If we send word in time, reinforcements could be here within hours. The attackers would be walking into a trap, not defending anything. It doesn't add up." Nathan shrugged. He'd been puzzling over the same questions and had come up with nothing. Deleting the thought for the moment, he turned his attention to the front line. At that moment, Nakajima Hiro, captain of the first squad, rose from among the ranks. Her expression was grim as she prepared to brief everyone on what was coming next. Everyone snapped to attention at the middle-aged Jonin's command. "Team 1, report." A slender figure rose at once, flanked by 3 Ginin. Nathan recognized him as Okura Seiya. Though his build was slight, rumor held that he rivaled the might of their own Captain Furukawa. "Seiya, your team will remain here at the camp," Nakajima Hiro ordered crisply. "Understood, Captain." Seiya offered a respectful bow and stepped back into formation. Nakajima Hiro turned to the other squads. "Teams 2, 3, and 4, prepare to move out." "At your command," replied the 3 Jonin captains in unison. "You will accompany me immediately to reinforce the second detachment." "Yes, Captain," Furukawa and the others echoed, already shifting into ready stance. Nathan's brow furrowed. Why leave a powerhouse like Seiya behind? Surely Seiya's strength would be more useful on the front lines than in camp. Before Nathan could voice his thoughts, Nakajima Hiro caught his eye and offered a reassuring nod. In that look, Nathan understood there was a deeper purpose to this deployment. The explanation would come soon enough. First, they had to move. With renewed determination, Nathan joined teams 2, 3, and 4 as they set off to bolster the second detachment. Nathan listened intently as Nakajima Hiro's voice rang out. "Holy Lord, summon your spirit beast." Okura Seiji gave a calm nod, as if the command were perfectly routine. He raised his hand, bit down on his thumb, and let a drop of blood fall onto his open palm. Unfazed by the pain, Seiji moved through a rapid series of hand seals, Hai, Shu, Shen, Wei, each one precise and measured. Guided by his blood, he wove the psychic energy, and in an instant, a ghostly night owl materialized before him. But Seiji's ritual did not end there. With a few more subtle gestures, an arc of the wrist here, a flick of the fingers there, he wove a ninjutsu link between the owl's senses and his own. From that moment on, everything the creature observed in the darkness Elmura Barrens, Seiji would witness in perfect clarity. Though the bond's range was limited, it was ideal for covert scouting. Watching the scene, Nathan's eyes widened as understanding fell into place. Of course, that was Nakajima Hiro's plan all along. They would dispatch the night owl as a mobile spy, then relay its discoveries back to Seiji in real time. With that information in hand, Seiji could radio back to headquarters with precise updates. Reinforcements, air support, or even a surprise counterstrike could be summoned as needed, pinpointed to the exact location. Nakajima Hiro's next words confirmed Nathan's deduction. "Report what you see," he instructed Seiji, already preparing to act on the owl's incoming feed. "Seiya, you're in charge of the owl from now on. Follow us covertly and relay any intelligence back to base immediately." Okura Seiya gave a firm nod. A moment later, a soft fluttering of wings filled the air as the night owl he'd summoned swooped upward, vanishing into the black canopy almost before anyone could blink. Nakajima Hiro watched it go, then turned to Nathan and the others. "All right, let's move." Without another word, he plunged into the forest. Nathan and the rest wasted no time, sprinting to catch up. A wave of relief washed over Nathan. Rather than splitting their forces blindly, Hiro had kept the squad together, and was heading straight for the nearest hotspot. He clearly planned to assess the situation on the ground before making any tactical decisions, a wise approach when so much remained unknown. Nathan silently approved. Dividing their strength in the dark without real-time intel would have been suicidal. Sticking together until they knew what they were up against was the only sensible plan. With Hiro leading and the owl overhead, Nathan felt the knot of anxiety in his chest loosen just a little. A soft rustle cut through the forest's gloom as Nathan and his companions quickened their pace, drawing near the battlefield. Up ahead, Hiroshi Nakajima suddenly raised his hand, the universal signal to halt. Instantly, the group froze, eyes darting through the dense foliage. The usual nighttime chorus of insects and birds had fallen eerily silent. Beneath the shroud of darkness, only the wind whispered through the leaves, and its hush was almost deafening. Every man held his breath, senses straining for the slightest movement, as if some ferocious beast lurked just beyond sight. Not one dared break the silence with so much as a sigh. Chapter 40, Night Raid, Part 2. Swoosh, 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 a sudden roar of ripping air filled the clearing. Dozens, no, hundreds of kunai hurtled out of the dense forest ahead, raining down like a relentless storm. The missiles came so thick and fast that no one dared look directly at their source. "Watch out!" Nakajima Hiro shouted. He wove rapid hand seals, drew in a deep breath, and then expelled it in a violent blast. Wind release, major breakthrough. A swirling gale burst from Hiro's mouth, a force like a 12th-level wind tornado that tore through the forest. Trees snapped, undergrowth shredded, and every kunai that had been screaming toward them was thrown back, harmlessly skittering across the ground. Nathan surveyed the aftermath with a critical eye. To uproot an entire swath of forest and repel so many kunai in a single technique, Hiro's wind release had to be at least a level 3 specialty, and it must have consumed well over 500 chakra just now. In normal circumstances, no shinobi would waste that much chakra merely to defend against thrown weapons. But did Hiro have reserves to burn? Nathan wasn't convinced, and the unanswered question only deepened the tension of the night raid. Hiro Nakajima's move served a dual purpose. Not only did he intercept the incoming kunai, but he also seized the initiative, disrupting the enemy's momentum. In the same sweep, he blew apart any hidden traps, forcing the opposition out of hiding, and it worked exactly as he'd planned. Before the last wisps of smoke and dust could settle, more than a dozen Rock Village shinobi charged into view. Though they tried to keep their composure, snapped branches and scattered leaves clung to their armor, betraying their haste. Nathan and the others had no reason to laugh, however. Almost the instant those first dozen appeared, 2 smaller squads, nearly 10 men in all, emerged to Nathan's left and right. His heart sank. Across the clearing, the rock forces were arrayed in 6 distinct teams. Each was led by a captain wearing the Hidden Rock Village's Jonin uniform. Whether all 6 were genuine Jonin or only a few, it was clear. At best, they matched Nathan's group in skill, and most likely, they outnumbered them. This was going to be far tougher than Nathan had hoped. Except for the first squad left behind at the forward camp, only 13 shinobi remained with Nathan. 2 Jonin, 2 special Jonin, 6 Chonin, and 3 Jinin. Across the clearing, the enemy arrayed 6 Jonin plus 18 more, half Chonin, half Jinin, outnumbering and outclassing them. And that didn't even include the rock ninja holding off the second squad. By sending so many troops here, the enemy made their confidence clear. Either their fighters were exceptionally strong or simply too numerous to face down, and once the second squad fell back, even more enemies would turn on Nathan's team. Fortunately, Nathan risked a glance at the moonlit sky. Okura Sheng must have spotted their predicament from headquarters. Reinforcements couldn't be far behind. If they could hold out just a little longer, help would arrive. And with luck, they might even swing around and trap these rock ninja in a reverse pincer. Nathan's mind raced. There was no way the Hidden Rock Village had come all this way just to wipe out a few dozen foot soldiers. It didn't add up, and a chill ran down his spine. But the arrow was already notched on his bow. There was no turning back now. Even if Konoha's forces tried to buy time, the enemy wouldn't allow it. Sure enough, as soon as the 2 squads of rock shinobi closed in and began to envelop their position, they struck. On the battlefield, there was no room for hesitation. Every clash was a fight to the death. And with the rock troops outnumbering them so heavily, Konoha's ninja were at a severe disadvantage. Thank God, at least each side still fielded its own jonin. That prevented any outright slaughter of genin, an unspoken rule of warfare. Unless they had an overwhelming edge, jonin wouldn't casually attack underlings. The gulf in strength between a jonin and a genin was too great. Once a high-rank ninja unleashed his full power, the losses on the other side would be staggering. And if one village's jonin began targeting genin, retaliation would only bring more innocent young warriors into the fray. Nathan steeled himself. There was no escaping the fight now, only the grim certainty that this battle would test them all to the limit. After the last explosions faded, only a handful of genin remained standing on either side. Every reserve in the village had fallen. Reinforcements were gone, the jonin were out of the fight, and Nathan's squad was still facing twice as many opponents. The odds felt crushing. Nathan scanned the faces of his exhausted teammates. They were on their last legs, covering one another as best they could, but each breath they drew seemed a countdown to disaster. He couldn't let them shoulder this burden alone. If he didn't start cutting down enemies now, someone he cared about would get seriously hurt, and his own stress would spike beyond control. He slipped out of his defensive stance and activated his chakra monitor. A soft glow traced the gauge until it settled at 2,100 points. Nathan exhaled and muttered under his breath, "That'll do." A young rock ninja fighting at his side jolted to a halt. "What do you mean, that'll do?" he asked, eyes wide. Nathan froze at the surprise in the boy's voice. He hadn't expected his comrade to notice or care about chakra levels mid-battle. Maybe they weren't as overwhelmed as they'd all feared. Gathering his focus, Nathan nodded. "Trust me," he said, already plotting his next move. Seizing the slightest hesitation in his opponent's guard, Nathan exploded forward with every ounce of strength he had. In one fluid motion, he flipped his kunai from a forward grip into a reverse hold and slashed straight for the boy's throat. Startled by the blade's sudden arc and the cold promise of its edge, the boy's mind went blank. All he could do was stagger backward, and the kunai whistled past, cleaving a streak of air where his neck had been a heartbeat before. Relief flooded him as he pressed trembling fingers to his skin. He was unhurt. A triumphant grin began to form, only to be shattered by a shout from his side. "Watch out!" "Watch out? For what?" he wondered, spinning to see the companion who just stood beside him in the attack staring in alarm, not at Nathan, but at the boy's own chest. Confusion gave way to horror when he followed the gaze. Stuck to his shirt was a flickering talisman, its edges burning with an eerie flame. His face drained of color, joy vanished from his eyes, and a wordless scream of terror tore from his lips. "No!" A deafening explosion shattered the air as a burst of crimson flame swallowed the boy's body in an instant. Nathan had already vanished from the blast's epicenter, his form blurred by the instant body technique. The firelight painted his face in flickering reds, yet his expression never wavered. This was war, life and death, and Nathan had no room for mercy. The moment his first opponent fell, he pivoted to the Iwagakure Chunin, who had sounded the alarm. With barely a pause, he propelled 3 razor-sharp shuriken toward his new target. The Chunin twisted and weaved, but Nathan's aim was merciless. One of the blades slashed into his forearm, sending him stumbling. Nathan's proficiency with thrown tools was already formidable, enough to seriously threaten a genin, let alone a chunin. If he'd carried the right toxin, the injury might have been fatal. Instead, the wound simply incapacitated his foe. Unfazed, Nathan drew another kunai, ready to end the fight. With that thought, Nathan activated the instant body technique once more, reappearing before the Iwagakure genin in a blur too swift for the naked eye to follow.